Okay, good evening, everyone. We'll call the meeting to order. My apologies for the bit of delay. Common Clerk, first item. Oh, sorry, microphone. Here you go.
Your Worship, item 2.1 on the agenda, minutes of July 8.
Okay, thank you. Moved by Councillor Merrithew, seconded by Councillor Sullivan. Thank you. On the question, all those in favor? Everybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. Next item.
2.2, minutes of July 11.
Moved by the deputy, seconded by Councillor Merrithew, just by hair, I think. Thank you. On the. Oh, he didn't. Was it?
I didn't do it.
I apologize. Anyway, look, don't break the rhythm. These guys have got the rhythm. Councillor McKenzie, I apologize. On the question, all those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. Motion's carried. Next item.
Item 3, approval of agenda with one proposed addition from Committee of the Whole, resolution with respect to Sculpture St. John.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Moved by the deputy, seconded by Councillor Hickey. I believe that was. On the question, all those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. Next item.
Item 4, disclosures of conflict of interest.
Okay, not seeing any. Not seeing anyone tonight. Thank you. Okay, next item.
Agenda item 5, consent agenda.
I move that
We'll
5.1.
get you a microphone, deputy, please. Sorry.
I'll move 5.1 to 5.19, I believe, inclusive.
Okay, thank you. Moved by the deputy, seconded by Councillor Sullivan. Do you have a question, Councillor Reardon?
I just have a comment, if that's all
Okay,
right.
please.
5.7, which is the sanitary sewer structural lining Phase 3, various locations. I always go on about these week after week. And this week, Eastern Trenchless comes in at $344,904. The engineer's estimate for the work was $220,000, including HST. The tender was reviewed, and the staff spoke to Eastern Trenchless, and they have a revised tendered price now of $159,285. So I want to acknowledge that, because that shows initiative. Your staff has gone out and worked. They've talked to the contractor. They've negotiated the price, and so it's all good. So I just want to acknowledge that, and I'll just move on.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sullivan, you had a comment as well? Hold on, sorry, Councillor, let me clear a couple of mics. Councillor Sullivan.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just a quick one to acknowledge the folks organizing both Third Shift and 506. Happy to do our little part here at Council, but I'm sure people will be gushing in a little bit about Moonlight Bazaar and all of these festivals that we have going uptown. Great indication of the vibrancy we have going on in St. John.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the Common Clerk, as it relates to the Aaron Cusack's request to present to Council, is that recommendation to go to, I didn't see it there, is it to go to Parking Commission? Is that what we're endorsing through that?
Your Worship, that's correct. On the agenda, there's a recommendation to refer that item to the Parking Commission.
I'm just wondering, I know that that's going to Parking Commission. I guess what I'm concerned with is if Parking Commission makes a decision on it or not. I know that that's where it probably belongs proper. Just for some context, folks, Erin Cusack's a student at St. John High School. She's been working diligently at this for about a year and a half. We have lots of people that would present to us on a regular basis. If anything, the investment that we would be making in one of our youth who's going to stay here in the city and attend UMBSJ to present to Council with the ability to also go to the St. John Parking Commission, I'd ask that Council schedule a time to hear from one of our youth, just from a strictly youth empowerment piece, but just strictly from also the fact that this is somebody that is young and has taken a real interest in our uptown St. John and wants to, although the decision may not be here, it eagerly wants to present to this body. I'm wondering if
Sorry
we can
to interrupt,
support
Councillor.
that.
Can we just pull it out?
We can. Absolutely, we can pull it out.
Okay.
The other piece with that, Your Worship, is I'm wondering if the Commissioner of Water would be able to, it's in the consent agenda and it's an important item, if the Commissioner of Water would mind just giving some Coles notes or a quick overview regarding 5.16, just that 2018 annual water report, just some highlights that he could pull, just a quick synopsis. I think it would be beneficial for those in the gallery and those that are listening. I think it's important to get that.
So want to pull that?
Please.
Pull that as well? Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay, so just that you've got those numbers, Common Clerk?
So there was one that was pulled.
5:15 and 5:16.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And
So just, the motion will be to accept in the consent agenda from 5:1 to 5:19, excluding 5:15 and 5:16.
okay, thank you. The mover and the seconder is fine. Thank you. Did you have something to add, Common Clerk?
No, I was
Okay.
just questioning whether you wanted that update now or during.
No, we'll
Okay.
pull them out. Yeah.
Very good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let me just clear the mic. Okay, perfect. Thank you. On that question then, all those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. Next item?
Next item, members' comments.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Worship. Just want to remind everybody, coming up September 3rd, 4th, and 5th is the big fair taxation. What's the word? I lost, what is it?
Taxation.
Hearings, thank you. It's open to the public. It's all about fair taxation. It affects every single person in the province of New Brunswick. You're allowed to submit. You just got to go to the website, www.gnb. That's the government of New Brunswick, by the way. Just look for it, apply, but by all means, please, look at the press and have your say on fair taxation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hickey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple things. Certainly wanted to, as Councillor Sullivan mentioned, gush over Moonlight Bazaar. It was a tremendous event. I know it must have topped 10,000 people. I didn't hear a number, but it must have been between 10 and 12,000 people that were crammed into streets in the uptown, and I think it was fantastic. Hopefully next year we can do something about running out of beer. It seems to be a consistent issue, but small one I'm sure we'll get over. And then just a heads up for another big festival in the uptown in Ward 3, Area 506. We've got our weekend passes. Make sure you get yours too. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Strobridge.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to speak to you and as the chair of the meeting. We have an incredibly intense and busy agenda tonight. We've got a total of 7 councillor motions, so I would really like to stress the importance of 3-minute rule times 2 for each person, and even myself, when I hit 3 minutes, turn off my mic.
Yes, sir.
I don't need a courtesy, you got 30 seconds left, just for the sake of time, keeping everyone on track and focused, please.
Okay, thank you, sir. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Certainly, we've had Moonlight Bazaar, we've got 506 coming, we've got third shift. Forgot to mention Fringe Festival going on, that's going to be uptown. And for all the folks that are involved and the volunteers in these, we have an incredibly vibrant uptown, but we have an incredibly vibrant city. Quick shout out to Chuck Teed and the crew over in Seaside Park. They had Dumbo playing last week, and you know, if you follow your social media, they're doing wonderful things over in that park to keep things moving. And I feel badly, I missed music in Milledgeville. A couple of weeks ago at our last open meeting, music in Milledgeville is still running on Tuesday nights at Chanex, and some great partnerships out there. This Tuesday night is the Spinnaker Brothers playing at 7 o'clock. It's free of charge, but if you want to make a donation to the North End Food Bank, they would be happy to take it. You can't shake a stick in St. John without finding something to do in the summertime. And just thank you to everybody. We'll see you out and about.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to say publicly a big thank you to Heather Peterson. Heather Peterson's been working for Harbin Group for almost 30 years. She's put on so many events and done so many public work for everybody. All the events that are held at Market Square for the last 25 years have pretty much been organized by Heather Peterson. You know, the Canada Day celebrations, the New Year's Eve projects, and fun days that we've had at Harbor Market Square. I mean, she's retiring. I'm not sure that that's going to be filled by somebody, by Harbin Group, to do what she's done over the last 30 years. So I want to say a big thank you to her for that work, because I don't think she's ever got due thanks from this community, and she's put on a lot of public events. The other thing is, and I got a little package here, hope to make everybody happy tonight, because the Grove Committee and Jacqueline Hamilton and Phil Ouellette and so forth from the Grove Committee, and Amy, we did a tour of Crosby's Molasses, and I think all of you were invited. Crosby's Molasses has been around the city St. John for almost 140 years, and they're in their 5th generation of a family business. They do a terrific job, and they do make this Crosby's Molasses that we're all familiar with. And we have a little package for all the council members tonight that didn't get on the tour. But also, if you drink hot chocolate and you go and buy Nesbitt hot chocolate, it's made right here at Crosby's Molasses in St. John, New Brunswick. They have 110 employees. They have a great operation. And along with this molasses tonight, you're going to receive a cookbook that will tell you how to make molasses cookies and all kinds of goodies out of molasses. And molasses is healthy for you. And the other thing, in case you didn't know, it's great.
I just want the cookies.
It's great on ice cream. So did anyone try Crosby's Molasses on ice cream? No. This is the season for ice cream, so you should give it a try. So I just want to put a plug in for them, because sometimes businesses in St. John that have been here for a long time, we just take them for granted. We don't think of them often enough. But their family, the Crosby family, have done so much for the city. And it's just great to be able to go and see them. And sorry you didn't get to the tour, everybody, but you will get a little shot of molasses. And it's good for you. So I just want to put that plug in, Your Worship. And I'm going to hand this out to all the councillors and a cookbook, and and just make sure that you use the molasses. It's good for a year and a half.
Okay, perfect.
Next meeting, can you visit Moosehead?
Thank you. Thank you. You're all set.
Oh, you need
Thank you,
another
Deputy. Councillor Norton, we'll keep going while you're
Thank you,
handing
Your
out.
Worship. Ice cream's healthy for you too. And with that, shout out to the folks at Leisure Services, Lisa Casey, the entire team for what happened on July 20th on the west side at Dominion Park Beach. That Passport to Parks event was absolutely jam-packed. I know going into Dominion Park, the parking was alongside the road. The parking lot was filled, the beach was packed, and there were a number of events that were happening right from Timbertop right to the other side of the beach with boat rides. There was the firefighters were there. I know that there was barbecues happening, live music, a number of things. So a great event to bring community together. Also, I know that Councillor Sullivan was saying that there's lots going on and no reason not to get out and enjoy some community activities. Another one is Seaside Park, the Friends of Seaside Park. Busily put together another wonderful summer agenda. August 6th, 8:45. You can come out and see a movie, fog permitting, and so far it's been cooperating. Mary Poppins Returns is the featured film for that evening. And thanks to St. John Energy for putting up a sign that was handcrafted by the Friends of Seaside Park, and all their work bringing awareness to that park and what a gem it is. So thank you very much to those folks in St. John Energy for doing the heavy lifting and bringing that new sign to Seaside Park into prominence. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Reardon, we get 2 minutes before we kick off our public hearing, so off you go.
This isn't going to take long. Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to mention that this evening, we are all so grateful for a lot of the activity that's going on uptown. We've mentioned 506, Fundy Fringe, Third Shift, Moonlight Bazaar. We've had events with Market Square. We've had Passport to Parks, which is, it's all great, but all of these things are run with community grants, subsidies, and incentives, and we're coming into the lean years. So a lot of these things wouldn't happen without those. And so it's going to be a tough next few years for us, but it has been great, and we've really got the ball rolling on a lot of this stuff. So hopefully it will be able to continue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I know we'll make a quick exception because, Councillor, you forgot something you love to say every time, so off you go.
Appreciate it, Your Worship. So excited about everything else going on in St. John. I forgot my walk last week at the Cherrybrook Zoo. Weather's wonderful. The animals are loving it. They're still taking registration for camps. Thank you for continuing to support our Cherrybrook Zoo.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, 6:29. We'll just pause for a moment. Do you- Yeah, sorry, yeah, well, it's, okay, go ahead. Yep.
Your Worship, 7.1 on the agenda, we have a proclamation for Marathon by the Sea, 25th anniversary.
Okay, thank you. So whereas this is a very exciting year as the City of St. John welcomes the 25th anniversary of Marathon by the Sea, of the Marathon by the Sea event. Marathon by the Sea prides itself on being an inclusive weekend event for everyone, with a focus on family, fitness, and fun. It's an event that thousands of runners and walkers look forward to every year. And whereas, first known as the Festival by the Sea Marathon, Marathon by the Sea has grown to become an internationally recognized event. The course offers a challenging route which showcases the charm and beauty of historic St. John and the renowned Bay of Fundy. But Marathon by the Sea has also earned great respect and recognition in the running world as a Boston Marathon qualifier. And whereas Marathon by the Sea has a significant economic impact on the City of St. John with spin-offs worth an estimated $1.2 million in 2017 alone, according to Discover St. John. Over its 25-year history, Marathon by the Sea has led to tens of thousands of dollars being donated to various charities throughout St. John. It truly is a community-centered event that gives back in so many ways. And whereas entirely organized by a team of dedicated volunteers, Marathon by the Sea is proud to be the largest summer running event on the entire east coast of Canada. This year, being the 25th anniversary year, promises to be a record breaker with participants registered from Canada, the United States, as well as Germany, Italy, France, and Sweden. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Don Darling of St. John, do hereby proclaim that St. Patrick Street will be called Thunder Alley for the Marathon by the Sea 25th anniversary this August 10th and 11th. Okay, thank you very much. Next item.
Your Worship, it's 6:30, and we do a public hearing scheduled. The first item on the agenda is 9.1, and it's a proposed zoning bylaw amendment for 81 Bayside Drive. There is a Planning Advisory Committee report which recommends the rezoning.
Okay, thank you. We'll have no staff presentation for this item, so we'll move right into the public hearing, and I'll ask if there's anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the zoning bylaw amendment for 81 Bayside Drive. Okay, I'll ask again if there's anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the zoning bylaw amendment for 81 Bayside Drive. Okay, and I'll ask a final time if there's anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the zoning bylaw amendment at 81 Bayside Drive. Okay, not seeing anyone. I'll ask if there's anyone wishing to speak in favor of the zoning bylaw amendment for 81 Bayside Drive. Okay. I'll ask again if there's anyone wishing to speak in favor of the zoning bylaw amendment for 81 Bayside Drive. Okay, and I'll ask one final time if there's anyone wishing to speak in favor of the zoning bylaw amendment for 81 Bayside Drive. Okay, not seeing anyone. Thank you. Recommendation, folks?
I'll move the first reading.
Okay, moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Sullivan. Okay, and on the question, Councillor Reardon?
I've got a question for staff. In the kit, it says this application will correct the improper zoning applied to the site during the adoption of the City of St. John zoning bylaw exercise. So my question is, would staff not have the ability to correct that mistake themselves? Does that have to come to council? The only reason I ask is there's staff time in putting together a presentation. It's pretty straightforward. You're going to get, no one's going to go forward or speak forward or against it. It's just all the paperwork and then bring it forward to us. So it just seems like it's not an efficient.
Great question. We'll go to the podium for that to answer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the councillor. Unfortunately, the Act is very clear that any zoning bylaw map amendment or text amendment requires a public hearing. So it's not a matter of us simply going and changing it on a map. If we did that, we can technically do that. It would technically be non-compliant to the Act.
I guess where it was a mistake, though, that it's recognized that it's been applied incorrectly. It just seems like it would be simple, but I thought I'd ask.
Yes, I would just add, in one of my previous lives out west, a team out there had a direction from council. I'm not sure if this council can do that, and I defer this to the commissioner. But during the exercise of transitioning to the new bylaw there, gave a direction to the bylaw team that any corrections be simply brought immediately. We found this purely through a customer inquiry. I think we would just do it automatically, but that may be another option that could be considered.
Okay, just food for thought. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Thank you for the response. Okay, I don't see any other lights, so on first reading, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any? Thank you.
A law to amend the zoning bylaw of the City of St. John.
Okay, thank you. Moved by the deputy, seconded by Councillor Sullivan. Thank you. I don't see any lights on the question then. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any? Thank you. Motion's carried.
A law to amend the zoning bylaw of the City of St. John.
Okay, thank you. Next item?
Your worship, next item on the agenda, 9.2, under public hearings, and it's a proposed zoning bylaw amendment for 149 Broad Street. There is a PAC report recommending the rezoning as well as a staff presentation.
Okay, I'm going to move to Ms. Hamilton for some introductory remarks.
Yes, Your Worship, members of council. So tonight's, just before I introduce, is a brief staff presentation, but I just wanted to provide some context for council. Tonight's public hearing file for 149 Broad Street is very much a good news story. It had previously been before council as one of our dangerous and vacant building files that we've been monitoring through our compliance program, and at that time, council may recall that we recommended pausing the consideration of that file to give additional time for a prospective purchaser to come in and talk to us about their development plans for the property. These efforts yielded the application before you this evening and involves converting a property that was a long-standing vacant building to a residential development, which will certainly contribute positively to the city's planning efforts to drive growth on the Central Peninsula. So with that, I would ask Andrew Reed, who's our planner handling the file, to give just a brief overview for council.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hamilton. Mr. Reed?
Thank you, Your Worship. The application is a rezone of a vacant parcel or a property with a vacant building on it that was formerly used for an institutional purpose from community facility to urban center residential. The property is located in the south end of the city on the north side of Broad Street, and the property is zoned neighborhood community facility. Under Plan SJ, the city's municipal plan, it's designated medium to high density residential, and as you can see, the property is surrounded by this designation. The designation permits a wide range of housing types with an emphasis on the provision of higher density housing forms, such as an apartment, condominium, and townhouse units. So the proposal to potentially renovate the building into a multiple unit dwelling is well within the intent of the municipal plan. The preliminary site plan shows a number of site improvements to enable the tentatively planned renovations of the building. Complete review of any application for renovations and site improvements would be dealt with at the time of the submission of the building permit. Just an aerial photo of the site. The building on the site has deteriorated over the years and gone through a number of uses since its predominant use as the Courtney House, which was a long-standing institution. And the property does currently sit on the city's vacant and dangerous building list and is ranked #1 in terms of priority. In terms of public engagement, letters were sent out to area property owners within 100 meters, and the rezoning was advertised on the city website. The PAC voted unanimously to support the application. There were no letters received. However, one member of the public did speak in favor of the proposal. The staff recommendation is that the PAC was to recommend council approve the rezoning, and the same recommendation goes forward from the PAC to council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move into the public hearing on this matter then. I'll call if there's anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the zoning bylaw amendment for 149 Broad Street. Okay, I'll call for a second time. If there's anyone wishing to speak again in opposition to the zoning bylaw amendment for 149 Broad Street, you could please come forward. Okay, and I'll ask a final time if there's anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the proposed zoning bylaw amendment for 149 Broad Street, you could please come forward. Okay, not seeing anyone. Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the zoning bylaw amendment for 149 Broad Street? Okay, I'll ask again, is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the zoning bylaw amendment for 149 Broad Street? Okay, I'll ask one more time if there's anyone wishing to speak in favor of the zoning bylaw amendment for 149 Broad Street. Okay, not seeing anybody. Okay, thanks. Moved by the deputy, just quickly seconded by Councillor Sullivan. And a few questions. Councillor Reardon, you're first up.
I don't have a question, but I would like to say congratulations to whoever's going to do this. It's an extremely daunting project, and it's fantastic for the neighborhood. So it's great news, and so I just wanted to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hickey.
I think Councillor Reardon kind of stole my thunder on that one. I was just echoing the same thing, and thanks to staff for identifying this as a potential project to hold off on too.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor.
I just have a question. Is there any timing on this? I mean, I think it's a great project, but I hope that it will happen. So once we rezone it, is there anyone in staff? I mean, do they have a year or do they have forever?
Mr. Reid.
Through the Deputy Mayor, through your worship, there's no kind of sunset clause on a rezoning in this case. Basically, the rezoning would stand, and that would enable any kind of future redevelopment of the property. I would add that the applicant is here tonight, so if he wishes to add anything to that, he may. But
We can't now. Yep.
No, it's too late now.
Okay, so
Okay, thank you. I just hope it continues. Thank
want to jump in? City Manager?
Your Worship, to the Deputy Mayor and to members of council, just as a sidebar, for the time being, the building remains on our dilapidated building list. What you are supporting this evening, if you read first reading, is a motion to change the zoning. If, as this progresses, the staff gets to the conclusion that things are not progressing as they should, then we will be returning to council with additional recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Deputy. I guess, yeah, just on that same theme, so I think it's sort of excellent sort of rezoning here, but do we have capacity, Mr. Reid, or through you maybe, or through the Commissioner, do we have capacity in the future on these types of projects to, I guess what I'm thinking is to speak to capacity, timelines, so when is construction going to start? Do the proponents have, the sort of appropriate capacities? I mean, understanding that the city manager said we'll continue to monitor the building. Is there a means within this process to speak to those items so that we have, we have a bit more commitment around when the project will begin?
just to clarify, Your Worship, are you speaking about tools through the rezoning to set a deadline or through enforcement tools?
Well, I think folks, I won't speak for anyone else, I'm excited about the project, but this is also a project that folks have been watching for quite some time, and it would be nice to know when applications are coming forward, when is construction to begin, like what are those commitments? And, perhaps it's outside of this process that we're in, but, and unfortunately, again, the proponent missed the opportunity to come to the podium. Those would have been questions I may have asked. So we certainly love to follow up on that for future applications. I think those are important commitments for the public to hear in a building like this or any other building. Yes, this is when construction is planned. I plan on starting next month, and we're going to be done in the fall of 2020, and those types of things.
If I could add, Your Worship, indeed, in preliminary conversations with the applicant, there was interest in beginning interior renovations subsequent to the rezoning, and that would enable that, but we won't quite know until a building permit is taken out, and that hasn't been done yet.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I don't see any other questions, so I'll call on first reading then. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any, thank you. Common Clerk, I get your mic, sorry. Here you go, sir.
A law to amend the zoning bylaw of the City of St. John.
Okay, moved by the deputy, seconded by Councillor Sullivan. Thank you. I'll call the question then on second reading. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you.
A law to amend the zoning bylaw of the City of St. John.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Reid, for all your work. Okay, next item.
And the final item for the public hearings is 9.3 on the agenda, and it's for a proposed Section 59 amendment at 49 Knoll Avenue. There is a Planning Advisory Committee report which recommends the amendment.
Okay, thank you. And no staff report, so we'll move right into the public hearing. And I'll call, if there's anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the proposed Section 59 amendments for 49 Knoll Avenue, to please come forward. Okay, I'll ask again if there's anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the proposed Section 59 amendments for 49 Knoll Avenue. And I'll ask a final time if there's anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the proposed Section 59 amendments for 49 Knoll Avenue. Okay, not seeing anyone. I'll ask now if there's anyone wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Section 59 amendments for 49 Knoll Avenue. Great. Just go to the podium, and if you could just give us your name for the record.
Stephen Britton.
Great.
And sure, if there's any questions, I'd love to answer.
Okay, so you're in favor of the amendments?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Any questions for Mr. Britton? Deputy Mayor.
Hi, well, I don't have any question for you, but I just want to say congratulations. This is your fourth large apartment building, and I think they're going over very well. And, you know, it's a great location, and you're doing a good job out there. And it seems unreal, but all these apartment buildings are getting filled up. So there's a lot of people that's coming from somewhere or renting them. So it's nice that you're doing it, the project.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy. Councillor Reardon, did you? No, it's mine. You're good? Yours is for staff. Okay, thank you. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, I'll call again if there's anyone wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Section 59 amendments for 49 Knoll Avenue. Okay, and I'll ask one more time if there's anyone wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Section 59 amendments for 49 Knoll Avenue. Okay, not seeing it.
The recommended amendment.
Okay, moved and seconded. Thank you by Councillor Merrithew. Thank you. And now Councillor Reardon, you have a question.
I have a question for staff. Oh, Ken, welcome back.
It's been ages.
So when I read through this, Ken, we're going from 46 to 47 units, and originally there was some dialogue, it sounds like, from reading this, of whether or not the system could support 47 units versus 46. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So based on projections that it would accommodate, the system can accommodate that, if there's any problems, are we protected?
Through your worship, my understanding in talking with our engineering staff is that we've done a thorough analysis and that we're fine with 47. I believe there had been some consideration to go to a higher number, and that's when the modeling and the studies had shown there was some concern. So we took the conservative approach and said, okay, we know that we can handle this one additional unit. Anything above that is kind of questionable. Let's just leave it there.
Okay. All right, fine. I was just trying to get more of the background on that 46 versus 47. It seems like one shouldn't make that much difference. So I guess we're right on the borderline then.
My understanding is that it has to do with some of the downstream areas that the system feeds into.
Okay.
And the models and studies were showing there may be an issue, so it was best to just allow the one.
Okay, all right, good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Okay. Okay, the motion's on the floor. I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Aye. Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any? Thank you. The motion is carried. Common Clerk?
That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Okay. Next item, Your Worship, proclamation. It's item 7.2 on the agenda. India Independence Day, August 15th.
Okay. Okay. No, I've got it here on my machine. Thank you very much. So, whereas India is a diverse, vibrant land, rich in heritage, tradition, and a variety of topographies, cultures, and languages. While each region in the country has its own distinct individuality, they are, at the same time, a proud part of their united identity, the nation of India. And whereas India is home to 1.3 billion people and holds a significant position in the world's economic, political, social, and cultural landscape. Over the years, many people from India have immigrated to Canada to live, work, and contribute to the development of Canada as a strong, diverse nation. Their love and gratitude for their new home holds as strong as it does for their country of origin. And whereas in St. John, too, we now have a sizable and rapidly growing Indian community who, with their energy, passion, and hard work, actively contribute not only to our economy but to the richness of our social and cultural spectrum. While connected to their roots, they have embraced their new home, sharing their traditions and cultures freely with our community, but also adapting to their present surroundings. And whereas August 15th is India Independence Day. In 2019, this day marks the completion of 72 years of India's existence as a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. It is a time of joy and celebration of India's eventful journey and progress to the present day. It is also a time to recognize the pain and hardship endured to reach this point and show gratitude to the many selfless souls whose courage and sacrifice earned India its freedom and identity as an independent nation. To them, today we bow as the Indian national flag is raised in honor of this momentous milestone of the remarkable nation. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Don Darling of St. John, do hereby proclaim August 15th, 2019 as India Independence Day in the city of St. John. And I just wish to add a quick comment that I would attest to the very strong Indian community here in St. John and how greatly they are contributing to making this the city even more diverse and culturally rich. So I wish to thank everybody within the Indian community. Okay, next item.
Next item on the agenda, Your Worship, is 8.1. It's a Develop St. John Priority Infrastructure Projects update.
Okay, I'll go to Ms. Hamilton for an introduction.
Yes, Your Worship, members of council. This item is a recommendation coming forward from the July Growth Committee meeting with a request to endorse the 3 priority infrastructure projects that are catalytic from a growth perspective for the purposes of seeking external funding from other levels of government. So these 3 projects include a new school in the Central Peninsula, development of the Fundy Key site, and the development of a new interchange at Ashburn Lake Road. These 3 projects all have strong business cases in terms of leveraging significant economic benefits, including tax-based growth, and efforts to pursue funding for these projects are being led by Develop SJ. So we thought it would be helpful as context for council this evening for Steve Carson, CEO of Develop SJ, to provide some context on the business case from a growth perspective in pursuing these 3 catalytic projects.
Okay, wonderful.
Great. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you, Your Worship.
We'll just get
Jacqueline. As the commissioners mentioned, as Develop St. John was created almost just a little over 18 months ago now, as we looked at how we were going to really focus on projects that would be catalytic in nature to really help drive private sector investment that were obviously compatible and consistent with the municipal plan and other priorities of council. We took a deep dive into a number of projects, and 3 really rose to the top in terms of their significant economic impact and potential. As Jacqueline mentioned, I know these projects have been discussed at the Growth Committee on a number of occasions. I know we've had discussions with council all along, but tonight we'll go into just a little bit of the high-level business planning that's been done around these 3 projects. From a Develop St. John perspective, while we're focused on these 3 major projects, I should also report that We have another 56 kind of projects in our hopper that are strategic in nature, that will lead to further residential, commercial, and industrial tax base growth. And those 56 projects represent an increase of potential increase, if all came to fruition, of over 560 million. But these three projects that we're focused on this evening, we believe have the greatest ability to leverage private sector investment and tax-based growth. We are developing, as we know, with all three levels of government today, strong and compelling business cases are required to leverage public sector dollars. So we are really focused on ensuring that we've got the most compelling business cases around our priority projects. And obviously these projects support the vision of Plan SJ and the neighborhood plan that's currently in the process of being finalized. So the Commissioner mentioned the three projects, so I'll just go in and take a high-level pass at each one of them. We do have detailed business cases around two in particular which have been completed, which is the Ashburn interchange, as well as the Central Peninsula School. Those business cases have been completed. The business case for the Fundy Key site is obviously still currently under development with our government partners as well as private sector investors, and so I'll touch on each of those as I mentioned earlier. The Fundy Key site, so where we're at right at the moment with the Fundy Key site is that we've stage one call for expression of interest for private sector partner has been completed. We're now in discussions with private sector partner, working with potential private sector partner on the feasibility, the due diligence, and obviously the critical piece of this is the business plan that's going to drive the project. We have received approval, as you know, federal funding for a portion of the seawall work from the DMAF funding, which we're really pleased to have that piece of the puzzle in place. And we also have submitted a bilateral funding application that is going through the process now, and that was reviewed recently by the Finance Committee. So the next steps of this project are really continuing our due diligence with the private sector partner on the feasibility, the business planning, and anchor use attraction, working with the province and funding a potential anchor use for opportunities, awaiting results of the bilateral funding application, and continuing to build out our strong business case for city, provincial, and federal government investment. Seawall work could begin in 2020 with the funding that's currently in place. So from an economic impact and tax-based impact perspective, the anticipated private sector investment in the site is $150 to $200 million, depending on the components that are currently at play. That's an estimated direct municipal tax revenues of $1.5 million to $2.5 million annually, so very significant. And indirect municipal tax revenues would be up about $550,000 a year annually as well. And there is an equally, if not stronger, business case for the provincial investment in this project. Moving to the Ashburn Retail Drive interchange, continuing working with continuing to work with the province in terms of their interest in addressing their existing traffic challenges, but also really communicating the really significant impact of this project on their revenues. So this project is required for the not only the new crossing development, but also the final phase of East Point. And I know Council has approved some recent rezoning to allow for that project, but really the realignment of Rossay Avenue and the construction of this overpass are really critical components of that to allow those projects to proceed. In addition to those, there'll be other private sector investment in the Tucker Park at the university campus and other places from an investment perspective that will also drive that. So our private sector investment is the numbers that have been analyzed by our consultants are very conservative in nature, but are very compelling. So it obviously, from a city perspective, it also at full build-out, has a significant tax base increase of $2.1 million as well annually, and allows for, as I mentioned earlier, kind of the completion of a lot of a number of the projects that we've been working with the private sector on, and it's really contingent on that. This infrastructure contingent on having those projects come to light. So just touching on kind of the strong and really compelling business case that has been developed by our economic consultants. These have been communicated to the province at the most senior levels within the province, and obviously as we know, the province is really focused on ensuring that everything that they're pursuing has a very strong and compelling business case, and these numbers will certainly validate this project. So at a high level, for every dollar that the province would invest in this infrastructure, the private sector would have an $8 spend. Again, very few infrastructure projects, if any in the province, would have numbers like we're about to see here. From a provincial revenue perspective, from the tax revenue generated from construction activity alone, so this would be from the crossing development, the final phase of East Point, and the overpass project itself, there is tax revenue for the province of $36 million on a roughly $32 million project. So pretty compelling numbers in terms of the return on that investment. And again, the annual tax revenues at full build-out, and these will be annually, would be $15 million to provincial coffers. So the province is a big winner in investing in this project from a revenue perspective. And really, this graph just shows, obviously, for the first 3 or 4 years, the province is investing in the infrastructure, so they're spending money, and that money hasn't started to come in yet, but you start to see just how quickly that cash and the additional provincial revenues flow out of that. And again, as we look at highway infrastructure projects around the province, we don't believe there is another project in the province that would have anything nearly this compelling in terms of the private sector return on that investment. I'll now move to the third priority project, and these are not in order of priority. These are all really critical projects to drive growth in our community, and we believe stand alone on their strong business cases. But as you know, the new Central Peninsula School is something that we've discussed, and this council has been a big supporter of, and we've advanced that from a community perspective over the last year and have made some significant progress. This will be a K-8 school, and with a 550 capacity. Just these slides aren't quite the right order that are coming up, but there's 550 student capacity with 30 classrooms. Early French immersion program would move back into the Central Peninsula. It currently doesn't exist there now. It would have an early learning center for up to 80 licensed spaces. And it would also, what we've done in terms of bringing in the expertise to design and program this school, it will give a really innovative and collaborative community learning commons, 12-month-a-year learning commons and community hub, where obviously the school is an important part of that, but it's not the only part of that. From a business case perspective, from a city perspective, obviously from a municipal tax perspective, there is an additional $1.1 million that will flow through this project from a property tax perspective. This project will support the transition and be a catalyst for this to become a really mixed income neighborhood. It will replace some of the oldest schools in the province with the most innovative. And from a community brand perspective, and as we start to as we continue to move forward with the population growth, it will be a really catalyst for that growth and reinvestment in the neighborhood. It will retain and attract young families to the urban core, and it will provide an innovative community commons to enhance programming. So Ernst & Young, E&Y have done our business case, a really in-depth business case around the provincial payback on their investment in the school, which is roughly a $30 million investment with what schools of this size cost today from an investment perspective in the province. If we look at the work that's been done in this neighborhood over the last number of years to improve number of dropouts, which is really a big indicator of social and other savings and costs to the province, is estimated somewhere between $13 to $26 million in savings to the province can happen with the investment in the school. Again, there would not be another school in the province that would have a potential school in the province that would have this kind of payback. Annual provincial revenues would increase, and this would be through additional investments in tax revenue and property tax revenue and other increases in annual revenues, provincial revenues of $144 to $262,000 a year, which at the present value of $3.3 million to $6 million range. So again, as we review these numbers with the province, they are very compelling and really help support the investment decisions that the province will be considering. So in addition, with the school project, we also, as part of how we've packaged this, we're bringing together approximately $2 million in potential community contributions to this project from a school perspective, again, which really indicates the city and the community's support for this project and the investments that will be required. So all three of these projects, discussions are active and ongoing with the province in terms of ensuring that they have all of this information being channeled into their process for their upcoming capital budget. And we're doing that obviously in conjunction with our private sector partners and other partners in the community who are stepping up and supporting these from a broad-based support. And we know that as a council, you've been consistent as well in communicating the importance of these three projects. And as you know, it's really important for us to ensure that we stay focused on the things that are important and get these checked off the list and then get on to the next ones. But we believe that with the business cases that we've developed and some of the ongoing work that's currently going on, that we're very optimistic that these will be well received during the capital budget season coming up here shortly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Carson. Just a point of clarity before we move on to questions. So, City Manager, we have a resolution in the first slide, but just a point of clarity from my perspective, and maybe a question to you is, this is meant to say these are the growth-related priorities that we have. Doesn't replace infrastructure asks or other. Could you just speak to that before we start a discussion on that?
Your worship, members of council, that's correct. What we are asking for endorsement and support from council on is the notion that these three catalytic projects are where our priority is in terms of our growth initiatives. It is not to imply that these three catalytic projects will be the priority for all infrastructure projects. We still have sewers to address. We still have other infrastructure that must be addressed. That is kind of like comparing apples and oranges, so I'll just say that are as important. So we're not asking for these to go to the top of the list of our capital program at large, but we're asking for support that these would be the three areas where we would focus our growth agenda.
Okay, thank you. Somebody
I'll move that common council, we endorse these three projects as our priorities, and that we'll pursue them with the province of New Brunswick.
Okay, thank you. And then Deputy, did you have some questions?
Well,
or
I just had a
moving that?
couple.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know in moving that motion, endorsing those three projects, I'm assuming we don't need to prioritize the projects. Like we would be working at all times on the three projects because they're quite different.
That's correct. All three would come from different portions of provincial and federal budgets.
And I guess I just want to ask a little question on the Fundy Quay site. I know that it was quite a few months ago, I think, that Develop St. John did up a brochure and you sent it out to various organizations or other parts of the country. Was there much response? Are we?
Yes, we had, we were pleased with the response. And as I mentioned earlier, we're currently in discussions and evaluating business plans, and it'll be a number of weeks, I think, before we'll bring an update to council in terms of next steps, but obviously any final decisions will rest with council in terms of a path forward, but we will be updating council in the coming weeks in terms of where we are in that particular component. As we've discussed, this is a really complex project, and it needs, kind of in parallel, to be engaging the other levels of government in terms of funding that are required for some of the investments in the infrastructure that's required, but at the same time have private sector developer involved in those discussions to really demonstrate that those public dollars will actually leverage private sector investment and what scale that would look like. So it's really a number of pieces of the puzzle, and they all have to move kind of in parallel, and so it's very complicated, but we're really pleased in terms of where we're at the present time, although it's very complicated as we know from past experience.
The other thing, and I don't think you addressed it, but on the Foster Thurston issue, a number of months ago, I think perhaps before the government change, there was some indication, I think, from the former government that there would be an allotment of money. I don't know if that announcement was made and it was carried on, or whether that was just something that was more or less promised and didn't come about.
The former government announced that they would like to proceed with this project, although detailed design was never completed. There was some conceptual design work done and some preliminary cost estimates, but they did not, the election then happened, and so.
So there isn't any big amount of money that's
this would
identified for it. That's
no, this would have
there.
to go into this year's or next year's capital budget process to prioritize this with other highway infrastructure that's being looked at around the province, and that's why we believe the private sector investment that's associated with this project should get it to the top of the list.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Councillor Strobridge.
Thank you, Your Worship. Steve, just back to the crossing development. Where exactly is that project at today?
Well, it's the developer has invested significantly in obviously land acquisition, planning, other EIA approvals, which are nearing completion, but it really is conditional. The project proceeding is conditional on the province committing to the interchange. The project is not feasible without this interchange in terms of its ability to attract the uses, the highway commercial uses that are envisioned for that project.
Okay, because I remember when they were here, I think it was last term, was it, when the crossing was here? I don't remember any requirement of this huge interchange being necessary for them to move forward. Could someone on our staff clarify that for me, please?
Ms. Hamilton?
Your Worship, through you to the councillor, certainly that was always envisioned that there would be an interchange as part of that redevelopment, and they still will need to come back to council with subsequent approvals. There were plan amendments approved, but they will require further due diligence that will come back to council, but it was certainly connected with the notion of an interchange, improves accessibility to open up those lands for development.
So then if the province doesn't build this, they're not doing the crossing? Is that what I'm hearing?
That would be my understanding, or at a smaller scale.
I think even more critical, or as critical, is even the third phase of East Point. To build out the remainder of East Point really requires this interchange and the realignment of Rossay Avenue in order for that investment to proceed as well.
I just question, we're chasing a file like the Foster Thurston Ashburn Lake Road development when it's completely out of our hands. We have no direct control over it at all. The destiny lies with someone else. Maybe we should be focusing on something we have a bigger part in and more, more power to make happen. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Reardon?
Thank you, Your Worship. Steve, I guess these three projects that you bring have the potential to be catalytic. If you get the right project. And having sat on the neighborhood action team, and through that the the school. I think the school project, I don't know much about the other projects, but the school project seems like it really could be iconic and catalytic. And a catalyst is something that makes things happen faster. So if you were in a chemistry lab, you'd add heat and it would speed up the reaction. And that's what we're looking for. So I guess when I look at the Fundy Key site, it needs a really fantastic project down there. And when I look at what a lot of cities are doing now, even down in Halifax, there's a lot of LEED buildings going up, which is leadership in energy and environmental design. And so I would hope that, you know, we could get or even the library in Halifax. We need that iconic, we need that great project for that space. So I don't want to settle for something that isn't going to be catalytic. At the end of the day, that is just another project down there that really doesn't drive all this other stuff at a quicker rate. So I'm really looking for that as well. So I hope we can get it, and I know that's not completely out of your hands. To a certain extent, you have to wait what comes in, but maybe rushing to something that's not what we want isn't the thing to do yet. So.
Yeah, no, I think to your point and Councillor Strovich's point as well, I mean, all three of these projects really rely on more on the other senior levels of government they do on the city. Having said that, they do have really that demonstrated ability to be catalytic. And in fact, you know, I think with the Fundy Key site in particular, I don't think, you know, we'll have the other levels of government making the investments in the public sector investments required unless it does check off those boxes that you've mentioned. And I know the city will be part of those discussions as well. So it will have to meet that high level, I think, before it proceeds.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Merrithew.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a follow-up to something you said, Your Worship, that if you read the resolution, it does say priority infrastructure projects. And so, to me, that trumps roads, pipes, and anything else you're going to ask for. So the question I would have actually to staff, are we endorsing this? Is this your endorsement as well? Or senior staff's endorsement?
We would like it to have a slight modification to this. I know this is what came out of Finance Committee.
Yeah.
We'd like to have a slight modification to this that speaks about how these three catalytic projects are the three priority growth projects. If council wants to make it more than that, then by all means, it's council's decision.
Well, I first of all, wasn't finance, but secondly...
Growth, yeah.
Sorry, growth, I apologize.
Thank
growth.
you, sir. Secondly, we should have priorities, and you can't have 20 priorities. All I'm saying is that this council will realize that's what it says, okay? It's trumping everything. That's what you're... So I'll leave that with you for a second. The second question, have we determined the cost to the city of St. John in any of these projects?
There was a commitment by the city as part of the crossing development for some sidewalk infrastructure, and potentially a pumping station. And it was I think 1.8 million over 3 years.
1.8?
1.8, and that's in the current budget, capital budget plan. The school project, there will not be any kind of cash expectation around cash investment in the school project. There may be some other things the city could step up to help out with, and we can discuss that in more detail as that project moves forward. And then obviously the Fundy Key site does have an expectation of some municipal investment in some of the seawall and other infrastructure that's been part of the bilateral funding, again, that's flowed through the Finance Commissioner and through the Finance Committee. And again, that would potentially be arranged depending on what funding programs are available from the two levels of senior levels of government.
And Mr. Carson, now that Fundy Key property are actually two parcels again, and what bearing does that have on two separate owners down there on any project?
Well, we have always thought that having the province as a part owner of that site is a good thing. They are very interested, obviously, in finding a way to get a return on their investment in the property they purchased from the city. So they are, actively involved in the discussions with us at the table as a partner in the site. So I think we're in better shape having the cash from the province for the land and having them at the table as a partner in pursuing the development of the site.
All right, thank you. City staff, just my last comment, please. I'd like to know what kind of monies we're looking at for the city, you know, and I don't think, I think there's numbers out there, but they're not hard and fast by any means. Yeah, okay, thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. You were over by 10 seconds. I was just about to cut you off, so
Yeah,
thank you.
Steve took a lot of time answering.
You did, yeah. Thank you. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Worship. Steve, I think these are excellent opportunities. I think they check off all the boxes for me. The one thing that I wanted to ask, I guess you, City Manager, in the resolution it says federal and provincial governments, with the exception of emergency response-related funding. So that still leaves the door open if we need something else, that we're not cut off from getting it?
So I owe an apology to council. We should have tightened up this wording before it came to council. This is the wording that came out of the Growth Committee. And again, I'd just like to stress that the staff recommendation is that council endorse the notion that these three projects are the priority for all growth funding.
Right.
Period.
Okay. Yeah.
Not for all requests for federal and provincial funding. I mean, if we can get money for a green project somewhere that saves on our sewer infrastructure, you know, that's not directly related to growth. We're still going to go after that with tremendous vigor, et cetera.
Right.
So with your indulgence, if you were to take a look at what's on the slide now, resolve that the City of St. John's top three infrastructure funding requests to the federal and provincial governments for growth related funding include, and then those three.
So
All right?
could we amend that, what we have on the floor? I think you moved it, Deputy, and then Councillor Reardon, you say, are you fine with that amendment? Yeah, and that just cleans it up a bit and tightens it up?
Yeah, okay, but I think these are definitely going to move us a long way to growing the tax base in the city of St. John. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Worship. I just want to reiterate on Councillor Merrithew. I remember back a year and a half ago, we would only commit money from the City of St. John on the crossing if the intersection of Rossay Avenue and Ashburn Lake Road was going to be dealt with. Otherwise, the issue is dead. Are we still reiterating that to the private enterprise?
Yes, and our discussions with the province, recent discussions with the province, these are, the interchange can't be built unless Rossay Avenue is realigned. So, you know, we haven't, you know, really got to how things would be phased at this point, but it's certainly, from a practical perspective, when they make the investment, I would expect the Rossay Avenue realignment would happen before the interchange, if it happened to happen over 2 or 3 years.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that's still in place.
Still front and center.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just a couple of quick comments and we'll move on. I think the spirit of this was to say, number one, there's a lot of work that's gone on being led by Develop St. John and its board. These are three projects that are different than a lot of other projects because they can help us grow the community. And you know, the provincial and federal governments get approached every single day. They're being approached probably as we speak on projects that others have in mind for St. John. I think it's important that as a city, we say these are, in terms of growth, these are the top three projects and really be able to say with some certainty through Mr. Carson, through the city manager and others that these are the priority projects and let's keep working on these ones. And when other people approach you, province and federal government, please come back and talk to us because these as a community are the three big projects that we want to move forward. So that's the spirit, I think, of what we're talking about. So. Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Carson, for your presentation and for all the work. And I'll call the question. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any? Thanks. Motion is carried. And get you a microphone, Common Clerk. Next item.
Your Worship, item 10.1 on the agenda is a consideration for third reading. It's a zoning bylaw amendment with section 59 conditions at 646 to 648 Westmoreland Road. It would require three motions to approve, one for the reading in its entirety, one for section 59, and one motion for title.
Third reading of entirety.
Moved by the deputy, seconded by Councillor Sullivan. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any lights on the question. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any.
A law to amend the zoning bylaw of the City of St. John.
Move 59.
Oh, sorry, just have to do the entirety first. Yep. So this is a law to amend the zoning bylaw of the City of St. John, be it enacted by the City of St. John and Common Council convened as follows. The zoning bylaw of the City of St. John enacted on the 15th day of December 2014 is amended by 1, amending Schedule A, the zoning map of the City of St. John, by rezoning a parcel of land having an area of approximately 1,000 square meters located at 648 Westmoreland Road, also identified as PID numbers 55208300, from 2-unit residential to neighborhood community facility pursuant to a resolution adopted by council under Section 59 of the Community Planning Act.
We've approved Section 59 conditions.
Okay, thank you. Moved by the deputy, seconded by Councillor Sullivan. On the question, all those in favor? Anyone contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you.
We'd move third reading by title.
Moved by the deputy, seconded by Councillor Sullivan. Thank you. On the question, all those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any.
A law
Thank you.
to amend the zoning bylaw of the City of St. John.
Okay, next item.
Next third reading, Your Worship, for consideration is a zoning bylaw amendment with Section 59 conditions for 0 Heatherway. That's item 10.2 in your agenda. It requires the same 3 motions as previously.
Move third reading by entirety.
Thank you. Moved by the deputy, seconded by Councillor Sullivan. Thank you. On the question, all those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you.
A law to amend the zoning bylaw of the City of St. John, be it enacted by the City of St. John in Common Council convened as follows. The zoning bylaw of the City of St. John enacted on the 15th day of December 2014 is amended by 1, amending Schedule A, the zoning map of the City of St. John, by rezoning a parcel of land having an area of approximately 55603 square meters located at 0 Heatherway, also identified as PID number 55208300, from 2-unit residential to mid-rise residential pursuant to a resolution adopted by Common Council under Section 59 of the Community Planning Act.
Move Section 59.
Moved by the deputy, seconded by Councillor Sullivan. Thank you. On the question, all those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you.
Move third reading by
By-
title.
Moved by the deputy and seconded by Councillor Sullivan. On the question, all those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any.
A law to amend the zoning bylaw of the City of St. John.
Perfect. Thank you. Next item.
Next item is 11.1 on the agenda, and it's a submission from Councillor Hickey entitled Ban on Single-Use Plastics.
Councillor Hickey.
Do you want me to begin by reading the motion?
Yep.
Okay. Subject on the motion is ban on single-use plastics. Whereas plastic pollution is a global challenge that requires immediate action. Whereas the City of St. John has passed a climate action plan and has declared an emergency on climate change. Whereas plastic waste ends up in our landfills and incinerators, litters our parks and beaches, and pollutes our rivers, lakes, and oceans. Whereas many jurisdictions have already taken the initiative to ban single-use plastics, and the federal government aims to have it done by 2021. Motion resolve that council instruct the city manager and staff to report to Common Council with a recommendation and assessment on the ban of single-use plastics in the City of St. John.
Okay, seconded by Councillor McKenzie. Thank you.
So I'll just briefly, if I can, Your Worship, just give a bit of more depth on where this motion came from and what my intention is with it. Increasingly, plastic pollution and sustainability is becoming a bigger concern in our community, and banning single-use plastics has become a necessity in many communities, and in my perspective, including ours. This impacts things like the closure of recycling facilities like the one in South End has only increased the problem. I'm bringing this motion forward for a few reasons. The first is environmental. The Council's adoption of a climate action plan means that we are ready and able to take action on climate action policy that has real and meaningful impact on our community and that is focused on the future sustainability of our city. I hope that this motion becomes exactly that. The second reason, I think, is protection of industry. As we all know, St. John is home to manufacturing of single-use plastics, most widely the manufacturing of plastic bags, where the federal government is committed to banning single-use plastics by 2021. It's my perspective that that puts the industry and those jobs on the line. My intention with this motion is to open a dialogue and engage those stakeholders so that they can adapt and stay competitive as we move away from single-use plastics in St. John. My concern that without the acceptance of this motion is that we continue unprepared for the changes that are inevitably coming, especially when we've seen jurisdictions like Prince Edward Island take steps to see the ban of single-use plastics. In essence, I don't think this is today's decision. Rather, I think it's a decision to build the sustainability of the city, both in the long term environmentally and industrially. And you know, it would be of my perspective that St. John needs to be ahead of the curve on this in terms of acting on a climate emergency, making sure we're adapting as best as possible and protecting the industry that currently sits there. And I know it has been a concern brought to me by several councillors around the table around a timeline on this and how it impacts priorities of council. It's for that reason that it was intentional that there was no date on this motion, and would leave it to the city manager and to the senior leadership team to update council on when it may be appropriate to take this on and act on council's initiative based on that. And really the timing of this is to give the public and industry the lead time to adapt to an inevitability. If we accept this motion today, it says that this is our intention and gives the industry the lead time to adapt in an attempt to define itself in an ever-increasing and changing environment. So I humbly ask council to support this motion and prove that our climate action plan has weight, and we are the city that is a leader in this province and is as innovative as we say it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd refer the councillor's motion to the Fundy Regional Services Commission, if I could get a seconder. I can speak to why. But if it dies on the table, then always.
Can we still?
No.
I know.
Yep, so we're waiting.
I'd second it in a few minutes.
Okay, I'll withdraw the referral, but I will be coming back to refer this to Fundy Regional Services Commission.
Okay. Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Well, I mean, I can support either motion, but there's two concerns I have. One is that the province has stated some time ago, and I don't think they've maybe started to work on it yet, but there has to be a regulation in the whole province for plastic, you know, who uses plastic. We can't have a separate, it would be difficult, I guess, if our city had one set of rules for plastic bags, plastic straws, plastic forks, and all the other areas of the province were on a different wavelength. That concerns me, because I think we have to have continuity through the whole province. And the other thing is that right now, all of our staff are very busy on trying to keep us going, and sustainability and so forth. There's just a number of issues, and we've got about 8 months left, and this term is completed. So I would want to have input from the city manager. I mean, I don't want to have this motion passed and then 3 or 4 or 5, 6 weeks from now, somebody puts another motion on and says, well, where is it? You know, we haven't got a report back yet, blah, blah, blah. I mean, we just can't handle everything at once. So you have to understand that. The staff are very busy, and if we have to downsize or restructure the city, and we may have to do that, that's going to take a bit of work, and it's going to put all of our staff on edge, and how many extra staff will we have to work on this project. So you have to understand that, and I know Councillor Hickey said that, but I want the public to understand that, because I don't think that we can come up with a new solution on how you handle plastic bags or plastic products. I mean, in some cases, they haven't even found out how to replace them. So, I mean, you've got to get items to replace the items that you're taking off the market. So, and I'd also want, if this goes through and when our staff is working on it, whether it's a year and a half from now or whenever it is, that we kind of go in sync with the province. I mean, we're not a big province. We're just a small group of people here, and we should all have the same issue. Anyway, that's my two concerns.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I certainly support both this motion, and I support it going to a broader discussion. Actually, after Councillor Hickey started talking about this, it was subsequent to that the Fundy Solid Waste Commission started talking about their issue with plastic bags and the fact that, pretty soon they're just going to all go to the landfill. Layer that with, the probability that it's going to be a federal ban. I think it's important for us to be prepared for it rather than reacting to it. Something that we also need to remember as we think about this, and I agree with the timeline that we have other priorities, but it still needs to be in the hopper. Being a city of 5 priority neighborhoods and much more poverty beyond those 5 neighborhoods, for many of our residents, these aren't single-use plastic bags. They're school bags, they're gym bags, they're bags for the beach, they're bags to take lunches in. We need to get it out of our landfills, we need to get plastic out of our environment, but we also need to think, how do we support our residents when we make that changeover? I'm glad it's been brought forward. I support the motion, and I also support it being, and this, it's not quite province-wide, but if it covers the jurisdiction that our landfill covers, that makes a lot of sense too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Norton.
Yeah, no, thank you, Your Worship. I guess the wisdom for this being a regional discussion is right now the Fundy Regional Services Commission needs a win. And that win could be had through the banning or the coordination of the phasing out of single-use plastics, where other topics have pitted community against community. We've already heard through Quispam-Cis that there's an intent or a desire to do so. So there's a willingness there, so we know we have a partner at the table. St. John, through Councillor Hickey, has expressed a desire to do the same. And we've also heard through industry that what we don't want to do to business is give one business an unfair advantage over another based on the banning of plastic in one community in another, where jurisdictional lines just blend and bleed into the other. You could have franchisees in one location that are banning and others not. So a coordinated approach similar to what is being done in Quispam-Cis, in Moncton, Dieppe, and Riverview, where all 3 of those mayors have come out in their respective councils and have aligned themselves in agreement that they're not going to wait for the province, but they're going to move through a regional ban, shows a coordinated approach that listens to not only industry, but a desire amongst their citizens to become more environmentally sensitive and lessen their footprint. So I think this can be a win for the region. I think we get a more coordinated approach. We put it around that table where the regional landfill is also a stakeholder. And at the same time, St. John doesn't only get what it wants, but it will get what it wants in lockstep with our neighbors. And I think that's important right now, on especially in a time where whatever we can do regionally is better than what we do alone on our own. So with that, I would refer that this be sent to the Fundy Regional Services Commission for their consideration. And if I get a seconder, that's great.
Okay, thank you. So that ends debate. So on the referral then,
I can ask a question on why can we not?
Okay.
So on just the process, but not a debate. Yeah, so Councillor.
I guess.
So, sorry, help me just.
So a question can be asked on whether or not it's appropriate to refer.
So okay, then I'm going to ask that question. Is it appropriate to refer to the Regional Services Commission because they need a win?
Are you asking the person that sponsored the motion?
I'm putting that out there.
Well, I don't know who you're directing the question to, Councillor. I'm happy to give you my perspective, or if you're directing it to a respective staff member, certainly.
Yeah, so I mean, my view is that, is it appropriate to refer it there in terms of our process and so on? Yes, it is. The rest would be greater debate, and you know, we're not going to debate the motion any further. So is it an appropriate mechanism to refer this to?
No, it's an appropriate reason. And I guess I'll just say that for everyone to think about.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Armstrong, did you have a question on? No. Okay, thank you. Councillor Hickey again, just on.
Question on process. Is it appropriate to refer it to the Regional Services Commission when we haven't approved it in council ourselves? Like, I would think it would require council's support in order to refer it to the.
No, I don't think so. I think we can refer it in the motion, and there's a motion on the floor to refer it off for this deliberation. I mean, that would, anyway, I don't want to get into a big debate. That would then be an agenda item at the Fundy Region Service Commission to be discussed and debated, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you. The referral's on the floor, so we'll vote on that referral. All in favor? Aye. Okay, and those opposed? Okay, thank you. I see 3 hands up, so the motion is carried. Okay. Thank you very much. Common Clerk, next item when you're ready.
Your Worship, 11.2 on your agenda is a submission from the Deputy Mayor entitled Letters, Documents Addressed to Council.
Okay,
Well,
Deputy.
this may end up as a referral motion, but it depends who I get on the floor at all. What I'd like the motion to be is that we have a bit of a discussion on letters or documents that are addressed to council.
That's your
Anybody
motion.
wants to move it, I'll tell you why.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Armstrong has seconded it, yeah?
Okay, so I'll speak on the motion. I thought we already had a policy in place at the city. This is a bit of a housekeeping matter. A few weeks ago, we received a letter, which we often receive letters, of course, addressed to members of Common Council. It was always my understanding that if a letter came to address the members of Common Council, that's what it was. It was a letter to council, and that document or paper or whatever it was, email, whatever it would be referred to the entire council, which is all 11 of us, at our next scheduled council meeting. Anyway, that didn't quite happen that way. The Common Clerk's letter office got the document. They then emailed out to council, and then it just eventually got on social media before it ever got to be discussed at council. I just feel that that's wrong. It's wrong because regardless of who sends us a letter, it may be very confidential. It may be on any subject. In this case, it was from the province, but that doesn't matter who it's from. We should, just to do business correctly as a local government or a municipal government, any document that comes to us from whoever, we should have a policy that that document is kept among ourselves until we discuss it at council. Then if council wants to put it out to the public, so be it. That's the council's privilege. So apparently we don't have a policy, and that really bothers me, and our code of conduct doesn't have anything in it to say that somebody can't just take any document that comes to us and discuss it with whoever, whenever they wish. I just don't think that's good business. So at the end of this discussion, I'd like to say this should be referred to the Common Clerk's office or the city solicitor, and a policy should be put in place that names out that when anybody, whoever, sends a document or a letter or an email to the members of Common Council, which means all 11 of us, it doesn't go to a committee, it goes directly to the next scheduled Common Council meeting, and that we all have a chance to discuss it, and then it goes forward from there. And I also would like a policy on that has the words in it that it should not go out to the media or the public or social media. In time it will, but it should be discussed first at a Common Council meeting.
Okay, thank you, Deputy. So we'll have so we have an item on the table. Are you making a second motion?
Well, I can make a referral motion, but I paused because if
Okay,
somebody
perfect.
wants to
There's some
talk about
folks.
it,
Yep.
fine. If not, I'll refer it
Okay.
to the city manager, through to the common clerk and the city solicitor to put a policy in place and bring it back to us.
Okay, we'll come back to you then. Thank you, Deputy. Councillor Reardon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think that's a reasonable and respectable process. So I guess if all the councillors are in agreement, then we just change the policy. I mean, right now, we don't have a policy that addresses that specifically. So we would just change the policy. So you would have to find out what the rest of your councillors think about that. But I would support a policy that would address that in writing.
Okay.
It's good to have things in ink.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll certainly support a referral to the common clerk and to staff to get some direction. I won't support a policy that is a blanket, don't share anything with the media. I think it's important to get some direction from staff. The direction we're given, and this is loosely, the land, legal, and labor for committee of the whole. But sometimes there's material that we receive, and it could be through a direct letter to one of us. It could be through a mass. Sometimes there's information that we get that as an individual from a report from staff that hasn't gone to a committee yet, that has information in it that has been discussed publicly by members here. And when that's happened and I've been around and involved and heard it, I thought it was benign and, gee, that's an interesting piece of information. I mean, there's actually been times when I've been in a meeting where, in public, where, a member of council has released something that hasn't been released to council yet and been put on the spot and asked about it. And you know what, I just kind of rolled with it. And I mean, it wasn't land, it wasn't legal, it wasn't labor, and but was very interesting information to be discussed. So I think it's important to get direction from staff, and I certainly agree with and support that. But as for a policy that reduces our ability to have discussions with the public around public matters, I couldn't support that blanket policy. I look forward to hearing from staff on the subject, though. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Worship. So, I think the deputy has a point here. I mean, I hadn't opened that letter until I read it on Twitter, and then I went and read it. So I think that there is something to be said for having some sort of a process. It's kind of embarrassing if you get stopped in a store or something and somebody asks you about a letter that was sent to you and you haven't read it yet because it was out there so fast. And I look at it in the opposite way too. If this council were to write a letter to one of the ministers or the premier and it was on Twitter prior to them getting it, I think they would be a little bit of the same mindset. So, yeah, I would certainly agree that we have to have some sort of a direction from staff on this to make sure that this type of thing doesn't happen all the time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Similar mindset as what's been said by, I guess, Councillor Sullivan and also Councillor McKenzie. I'm happy to receive feedback and direction from staff as it relates to correspondences. In my 7 years, I've received, council's received the same correspondence, but it's been sent to with the person in the letter, Councillor Greg Norton receives a copy, sent right to his email address, and that's what's in it. Councillor Donna Reardon would have received the same thing and addressed right to her as the councillor. What's the gray area in that? I'd like to know if it's part of a council pack or part of a committee of a whole pack, or it's received separate from. It doesn't involve land, legal, labor. What are some of those gray areas? I guess philosophically, I always believe transparency is the best practice, and when it's not pulled out of a committee of the whole pack, or it's released in advance of being received by open in this venue, then it's probably benign. We're probably doing ourselves a favor when we're absolutely transparent, clear, and communicating all the information. At the same time, I've received letters, and they've never become public as well, because you could refer it to staff for study, and it never becomes public. There's issues with that as well. So I think we have to be careful when we say eventually it will become public, because I've been part of receipt of information where eventually it never does become public. It just gets buried. Or what happens is it never goes to open. I think if it doesn't touch a land, legal, or labor thing, we can always do ourselves in the public favors by being absolutely transparent. I think it's also, given the reason for this motion was, I was the one that took screenshots of the minister's letter and tweeted it out. It's interesting to know that the minister retweeted it. So from that point, perhaps it was benign, but I obviously set off some nerves on that, but happy to support the deputy's motion in getting direction from staff as to what they think. I support that, but I also support transparency and making sure that we're a council of transparency and not a council of secrets. Thank you.
Can I ask a question to make a point of order about this? I'm getting confused here.
Sure, Councillor, yep.
What we're
Hold
talking
on, please. Thank you. Microphone's on, yep.
I just want to make sure that we're talking about a letter that's addressed to mayor and council. Is that what we're talking about? Like, I get all kinds of stuff that isn't going to go on, but every letter that's addressed to the mayor and council does come on the council agenda, does it not? Yes? Okay. So this is the only thing we're talking about, something that's addressed to mayor and council that comes on the agenda, that we would only normally receive that on our council agenda, but in an unexpected circumstance, it was sent out. Something could be sent out to us before council. So I would only see a letter. I haven't, any letter that's on here tonight, I didn't get it until I get it on my council kit. So if that's what we're talking about, I'm just saying, I guess that's a respectful and courteous, that if it comes to council and it's addressed to mayor and council and it's supposed to be on the council kit, but for some extraneous reason it's sent to us separately, then we should have a policy that until it does come, we're given the heads up to council that it's not public property. I guess that's what I thought we were talking about and what I think I'm supporting.
Okay, thank you. Common Clerk, just a question for you, because I think we're sort of into lots of nuance arguments here, but what is I'm surprised that we don't have a policy in place, and I'm glad that we're going to clean it up, but what is the process that we have followed? Have we consistently followed a process with letters like this, and what is that process?
Yeah, so Your Worship, our typical process is any letter received addressed to council would be placed on the next agenda. I guess what was unique in this circumstance is the minister's department reached out to the clerk's office and asked if we had sent this to mayor and council. So in this particular instance, the email was forwarded to council prior to it going on the council agenda, which it's on tonight's agenda.
Okay, thank you. And then I just two comments, and then we'll try to close off here because we've got a long night ahead of us. I think I think that this is, to me, this is not a debate about whether we want to be transparent or not. We absolutely have to be transparent. This is a discussion about a responsibility that we have to present factual information, and we're going to have a further follow-up on 15-1 tonight about this letter. And so again, it's not about transparency, it's about accuracy. And I guess I'll hold further comments to 15-1 when we get into that discussion on the letter tonight. So, okay, thank you. City Manager, do you want to jump in for a moment here?
Your Worship, members of council, I think this is one that is easily solvable. If you were to refer this to the city manager to develop guidance to Common Council on the issuance of letters that are addressed to council. I think we can come back to you with guidance that clearly supports the notions of full transparency, full disclosure, et cetera, whilst also protecting the notion of informed public awareness, and that everything is sent out in context, and council has an opportunity to be the first to provide additional context on that. I think we can get there from here with a referral motion to the city manager. And one point of clarification for the public record, Councillor Reardon asked me whether all letters that are addressed to council make it to open session. I said yes. I need to correct that. All letters that are not otherwise deemed confidential, cabinet privilege, or whatever else make it to common council. There are clearly some letters that would not.
Okay, thank you. On the referral, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. Next item, Common Clerk.
11.3 on the agenda, Your Worship, is a submission from the Deputy Mayor.
Okay, folks. Point of order, folks, please. Yeah, thank you.
11.3, Your Worship, is a submission from the Deputy Mayor entitled Trees for Chipman Hill.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Well, we have a citizen who would like to contribute to the city of St. John in a tune of 24 trees, 12 on each side of Chipman Hill. And it would be the perfect time to do it once the construction work is completed and before we do the paving. So what they'd like to do is donate the trees, and of course in return they would get a city's tax receipt. If the city would allow this to happen, it would beautify that street, and that street goes to many facilities, including the TD Canada Trust, our own City Hall, the Aquatic Center, Chipman Hill Suites, the Delta, all the cars from the Delta come down the Chipman Hill and park in there, St. John Courthouse, St. John Police Department. So I think it would be a nice gesture if we would look into this to see if it can be accepted. I know there are certain kinds of trees that have to be placed on streets that have infrastructure, so if somebody has to second that.
So, sorry, Deputy, something happened there. Yep, okay, your mic's on.
Well, my motion was that we accept this donation from a citizen of 24 trees, 12 for each side of Chipman Hill. The donor is certainly willing to have the staff advise what type of trees can be planted on Chipman Hill, and they would be up to the city, of course, to pick up the trees at a local garden shop in the city. And this could be done after the construction that's taking place right now and the paving, before the paving. So I know that sometimes some streets can have deep holes dug because of the infrastructure, so I'd have to leave that up. That'd have to be referred to the staff that they could do that. But it certainly would beautify the city, and it's a very main corridor here in their city, so.
Okay, so it was originally a referral, but it's not a referral anymore to the city manager.
Well, it is going to be referral, but if staff anybody wants to
Can I
talk
just
about
have
it,
the
we
city
can cut
manager
off
jump in first, and then we'll...
Your Worship, members of council, the notion of beautification of Chipman Hill was certainly discussed during project definition and development, and the notion of putting trees on it was discussed at length. Our city engineer's recommendation is that that not be considered. There is significant conduit, both electrical, telephone, water, and sewer on both sides of the street. And therefore, planting trees becomes very problematic. We can explore this another time, but perhaps there are other beautification ideas other than planting trees that this donor would be willing to consider, and we'd be happy to explore those with this donor as well. But planting trees may be a problem. So as a referral motion, it's appropriate, so we can take a second look, but to actually support the planting of trees is problematic at this time, because we just don't know.
So can we just have one question answered? Like many of our streets have trees, so what is the difference of the infrastructure on Chipman Hill versus other streets?
Want to elaborate a bit further there, Commissioner Water?
Okay, sorry, let me clear some mics up. Hit your button for me, Mr. McGovern. There we go. Okay.
Good evening, Your Worship. with respect to Chipman Hill, as the city manager pointed out, we did want to have trees on it, or additional trees beyond what's already there. However, as the city manager mentioned, we do have infrastructure along, underneath the sidewalks on either side. So along the west side of Chipman Hill, there's a natural gas main that runs down underneath the sidewalk, as well as electrical conduits now, and additional ones that are being added, with St. John Energy doing some work there. And then on the west side of Chipman Hill, there's also infrastructure underneath the sidewalk, and in that case, it's all electrical conduits that run the entire length. So we wanted to do that. We couldn't find a place to actually add a tree because it is so congested with infrastructure. However, we have added brick median. There's brick median now at the lower portion of Chipman Hill. But with the work that is planned, there's brick median essentially pretty much all the way up to the top of Union Street as part of this project. However, in saying that, if the donor is open to donating those trees, I could work with the Commissioner of Transportation and Environment, and maybe there's another project where they could be added.
Can I just ask a follow-up question, though? So I just want to make it clear then, this street, Chipman Hill, has more infrastructure than other streets that do have trees. I guess people don't understand that, and so that needs to be clarified so the public understand that too.
Yes, that's correct. This street does have a lot of underground electrical as well as natural gas mains, and just the placement of them, given the project that we see going on now with the water, storm, and sanitary down the street, the only place to add natural gas at the time, and for the underground electrical, given there are no overhead utility poles or overhead electrical, was on either side of the street under the sidewalks.
So it's not possible then to have any trees?
So did you want to refer off for other beautification ideas?
Well, I can take that back to the donor.
Okay. Okay, so with that information, I've got 3 other speakers. Let's move.
Well, I guess the motion would have to be received file if it can't be done. I mean, go ahead,
Okay.
but there's no use of me referring it tonight.
Okay. So we'll modify the motion to receive and file for tonight. I don't remember who seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Okay, thank you. Councillor McKenzie, anything to say?
Well, I just wanted to say that if we did refer it to the city manager and gave staff the donor's name and number, there's a catalog that was developed back in 2013 with items in it that could be donated to the city, benches, flower pots, all that stuff. And if we can't put an actual tree in, there might be something in there that the donor would be interested in.
Okay, thank you. I would say that there was a business owner on Chipman Hill Suites, and I'm looking to Brent and Mr. Hugenholtz a number of months ago that I got involved with, and this is very consistent that it's a very crowded infrastructure. We communicated that back to the business owner that it just, unfortunately just couldn't be accommodated, but other beautification opportunities perhaps. Councillor Hickey, anything to add here quickly?
Just very quickly, just to speak to what Councillor McKenzie said, I think I would ask to keep the referral motion in the hopes that there's other options for beautification, whether it be potted trees or what have you, just because I know that Chipman Hill could certainly use it.
Okay.
I would ask to keep the referral as is.
Okay, so, yeah, there's a motion on the floor. Are you making a referral motion then?
I'll make a referral motion to the city manager.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll second.
Okay, second, thank you. On the question then, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Okay, thank you. Microphone. Next item.
Your Worship, next item, 11.4 on the agenda. It's a submission from the Mayor, financial restructuring.
Actually, I'm going to vacate the seat and just, if I could, just switch with the deputy so I can speak to this. Okay. You have to give me a microphone.
You have to press on the button there.
Oh, sorry. I'm hitting the sticker. That's why your mics won't turn on. I'm hitting the green sticker, which is not anywhere where yeah. So thanks very much. I just made a couple of tweaks here to the motion, so maybe I'll read it out, and if we can get it on the floor, I'll give you some background. So my motion reads to direct the Finance Committee in collaboration with staff to develop a restructuring plan which commences implementation in Budget 2020 at the latest and addresses the structural deficit currently outlined in the city's current financials. Furthermore, that this plan should be broad and address the 11 major barriers identified in the December Budget 2019 documents. Progress on this plan shall be presented to a full meeting of council as part of Budget 2020 deliberations by the end of September 2020. That would be my motion. Okay, thank you, Councillor. Just provide a bit of just context then, and I'm just going to read some of the highlights. So this council has embedded a fiscal responsibility and growth in its priorities with an objective of achieving, a sustainable future for the city and, more importantly, its citizens. Since the beginning of this term, council has taken many steps to achieve this goal. For example, the focus on growing the residential tax base, population, jobs, and equitable taxation. The pre-election white paper on sustainability and making evidence-based decisions on infrastructure with our asset management plan. The development of our long-term financial plan and capital plans will help guide future councils and encourage continuing continuity of focus. During the deliberations of Budget 2018, it became clear that council must act. Our structural deficit was growing and options were limited. Council voted unanimously to pause our necessary restructuring or cuts to see if a sustainable alternative could be found. Over the last year, our city management has been working with senior provincial management to deliver, to deliver a working group report. This report has now been delivered and, in my opinion, has not met its goal of financial sustainability by 2021 and will be further debated at a meeting mid-August. While I'm hopeful that new revenue opportunities will be identified over the coming weeks, it is our fiduciary responsibility to prepare a restructuring plan based on what we know and not embrace further delays based on hope and future promises. Simply put, we paused in the early new year of 2018 and now it's time to act. Moving from illustrative examples to tangible examples, I believe that we have a cost problem and must implement restructuring plans in 2019. That said, we must continue to push for a full suite of reforms so that the citizens of this city are not left with high taxes and diminished services. Regardless, we must prepare for an alternative Plan B and act in advance of any new council. So that's the background. I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Deputy. Just a question through you to the mover of the motion. Does your motion intend to implement the full restructured plan in 2020 and thus addressing frontline services, which would mean not taking the third year of funding, or is this like an implementation to start implementing in 2020, getting prepared for 2021? If you understand the question.
Yep, perfect. Thank you. So the spirit of this motion is to roll our sleeves up, finance, reporting through to council, working in collaboration with staff to come up with a range of options. I don't know. So I think the spirit of this is that, to move forward, that implementation plan could be in Budget 2020, for example, Councillor, to your question, but it could have multiple phases. It could be some portion of this. So I won't presuppose what the Finance Committee chooses to recommend. It's to say, look, we keep talking about ugly Plan B. Let's roll our sleeves up. Let's move from illustrative to hard scenarios, but it would ultimately come back to this body.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Thanks, Deputy.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I just want to say this is long overdue. Let's get to it. As I keep repeating, the numbers never lie. We have to act on this. We cannot wait. And we took like he said, we took a reprieve, and now we got to get at it. Forget what the promises are. They're only promises. So I believe as a council, we can make the right decisions. We just have to discuss it, and I thank the mayor for bringing the motion.
Hey, Councillor McKenzie.
Well, thank you, Worship. Yeah, I think that we have to recognize that, people are putting ideas forward that could potentially, bring new revenue to the city of St. John or save revenue for the city of St. John, potentially. but there's some ifs, ands, or buts that have to be addressed. And so while all that stuff is being addressed, you know, we've got to remember that this is only an estimate, a guesstimate, you know? When somebody says you're going to make $1.4 million when they put the levy in, well, we're already $1 million into that because we had the free levy, you know. So the 400,000 is a guesstimate. So, you know, we have to be careful what we say there. And I think that this is a good idea. You know, we work towards it, and if things work out and those promises and those guesstimates are right, good. You know, we can maybe save some things, but until then, I think we have to look at the worst-case scenario. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hickey?
Thank you, Your Worship. Or I guess Deputy Mayor. I suppose it would maintain as Your Worship. I just to briefly speak in favor of this motion, as Councillor Armstrong mentioned, long overdue. This is the restructuring we committed to. This is the restructuring we committed to doing in this mandate, and I will be happily voting in favor of the motion.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, but I would like to ask you, Mayor Darling. So what time frame is this now? This is going to come back this fall before we do our budget work?
Yeah, so you need
Like
to
in, like
Yes.
by October?
Yeah, and look, the spirit of this is, and you know, understanding that, you know, again, we'll be going through budgets, we'll be preparing. I softened a bit. Originally, my wording was to have it, you know, in September. What I'm saying is just let's get at it. Let's roll our sleeves up and let's bring an update to all of council. You know, by the end of September doesn't mean finished. To bring an update to all of council, but for the finance committee to, you know, to do its job, obviously in deep collaboration with staff on this, and to bring an update by the end of September.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
City Manager.
Your worship, members of council, first of all, I'd like to recognize the modifications that the mayor has made to his motion from the one that's in your package, and I think they're important modifications. So I would recommend that the verbal one be reread before the vote is taken so that we can properly capture it in the record. Two points of precision on this motion, because at the end of the day, this will be a guiding motion moving forward. The first one, Mayor, I believe that your last phrase, there is a typo from my understanding of what you're trying to achieve. Of the budget 2020 deliberations by the end of September 2019, not 2020. I would thank you for the extra year, but I don't think it would set us up very well for anything. And the second one I would draw the attention to council on is this notion of, and I quote, address the 11 major barriers identified in the December budget documents. This council is on record, and I fully agree that actually this council is unable to fully address those 11 major barriers that we're talking about. In fact, we have repeatedly said to the province in the white paper, etc., that we need their help in terms of reforms to address those 11 major barriers. So I assume that council is not asking us to solve all the reform issues by September of this year, which is, I know what is not what the mayor is intending by using that phraseology, but if you read it precisely, should be broad and address the 11 major barriers. And that causes some contradiction for me.
Okay, thank you. So,
I would just,
Mayor,
no problem. Thank you, City Manager. Just speak one last time here. I would gladly strike the word address and insert the word consider. So that therefore, I mean, it's just meant to be, again, broad. We have a range of barriers when we're talking about restructuring. I want all of those considered in our deliberations so that we're thinking broadly. If the
so you like
seconder-
to read your motion out?
Sure, I'll do it again.
But you can't have any more time.
No, I won't have any more time. So the motion would read then, direct the Finance Committee in collaboration with staff to develop a restructuring plan which commences implementation in Budget 2020 at the latest and addresses the structural deficit currently outlined in the city's current financials. Furthermore, that this plan should be broad and consider the 11 major barriers identified in the December Budget 2019 documents. Progress on this plan shall be presented to a full meeting of council as part of the Budget 2020 deliberations by the end of September 2019.
And the movers, okay? Okay, on the question, all those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion's carried.
Thank you. Am I next?
Got another one.
Oh, yeah, sorry, okay, Deputy, why don't I just stay out of the chair here?
Have to put your light on.
Common Clerk,
You haven't got your light on.
you want to call the question?
Oh, I'm sorry, Common Clerk.
Call the item, okay.
Wait just a second, you've gone. There you go. Yep.
There you go.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Next item on the agenda is 11.5, and it's a letter from the mayor entitled Letter of Support from Neighboring Communities.
Put your light on, please.
Okay, thank you. This is new ground here
Mayor
tonight.
Darling.
So I'll read my motion again and see if we can have a seconder. So that Common Council authorized the mayor to send, mayor and Common Clerk to send a letter to all the communities listed above, including additionally the community of Hampton, to seek further written support for an immediate first phase of tax reform as presented regarding heavy industrial cost sharing. Furthermore, that the following statement of support be proposed for the mayors and councils to consider. The towns of Grand Bay, Westfield, Rossay, Quispam-Sis, and Hampton, and the village of St. Martin's formally request that the province of New Brunswick implements the transfer of heavy industrial property tax revenue to host municipalities as a first phase of municipal taxation reform. We believe in a growing and thriving region of Greater St. John and need a strong St. John for this to be achieved.
Do I have a seconder?
Thank you.
Seconder by Councillor McKenzie.
Okay.
Would you like to speak on
Yeah,
your
just very
motion?
quickly give you the background. The letter is attached in your kit. So early in July, my office received a letter, and I thought it was going to be in consent, from the mayors of Grand Bay, Westfield, Quispam-Sis, Rossay, and St. Martin's. You may remember there was a Telegraph Journal coverage of that letter as well. I'd like to publicly thank them for this letter and their support. This letter is extremely supportive of the current discussion being had with regards to a first phase of tax reform, whereby the City of St. John would receive the provincial portion of heavy industrial tax. Estimates from the presentation at the July 18th Finance Committee indicate that this would generate in the range of $9 million per year in revenue. A request felt justified within the report and would restore balance with our request, felt justified within the report and would restore balance with our heavy industrial companies. So within the letter, I'll highlight just a couple of key statements, and I quote, "As your regional partners, we want to make it clear that we support you in your call for tax reform. Secondly, among the things we're hopeful will be included are significant changes to the way provincial property tax revenues are shared between the province and municipalities. And furthermore, as it stands, it's out of date and unfair. In fact, taking our shared perspective one step further, we would assert that St. John hasn't gotten a new or a special deal. We're talking about money that was raised in St. John and should have stayed within the city in the first place."
Okay,
Thank you,
thank
Deputy.
you. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Deputy. Certainly at Finance Committee, we had a good, healthy discussion about this and brought it to council. And at the time, the information we had said that this ask would have about a $20 million effect province-wide, and according to some reports, Service New Brunswick has said $80 million, so somewhere in that range. I guess for me, the spirit of this letter, I will support, and I will support sending a letter, excuse me, because we are stronger as a region. Personally, I think we need tax reform. We need a timeline on tax reform. We need tax reform moving forward. If it's heavy industrial tax, okay. If it's something else that directs money that's raised in St. John back to St. John, okay. So I'm not going to quibble about the wording in this letter. I think we need regional support. I think we're stronger as a region. I think we need tax reform and a timeline to get there so that we feel more certain about it. Am I married it to having to be heavy industrial tax? No, I'm not. If it's that, great. If it's something else, great. So I just want to make that point that we're stronger together. We need tax reform. We need it sooner rather than later. How it arrives to us, doesn't matter to me. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie?
Thank you, Your Worship. I like it. I think that, it's a good first step to working with the outlying areas. They sent a letter of support to us, and we're saying, okay, we need your support. That's all. And actually, what we're doing is we're supporting what the Premier just said a couple of days ago, where he would look at it. Now he's got all kinds of people saying, yeah, great, let's do that. It's supporting what he said. So I think it's great, and I'll be supporting it 100%.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? If not, on the motion, all those in favor? Aye. Contrary minded? Motion carried.
Thank you, Deputy. Okay, Common Clerk. Next item.
Agenda item 11.6, Your Worship, is a submission from Councillor Sullivan entitled Reversing Falls Bridge Barrier.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sullivan.
I'll start with my motion and speak to it briefly if I get a seconder. I move that the City of St. John send a letter to the Minister of Transportation requesting the installation of a suicide barrier on the Reversing Falls Bridge.
Sorry, that was Councillor Strobridge?
Councillor
Okay,
Strobridge. Thank you, Councillor Strobridge. Just briefly, the Sullivan family of St. John and Fredericton has lost a few of our members over the past years as a result of mental health. And I know this was a discussion in the province in 2017, and I really feel badly that I let it slip, and as we got busy in other things, I had intended on following up. Well, we had an incident a few weeks back on the Reversing Falls Bridge, and somebody else very, very close to me was involved. Now, they were involved in that they were crossing the bridge at the time and witnessed the incident and ended up on the phone with 911. And in 2017, when I was thinking about this, I certainly thought about the families of the person directly involved and family and friends. But at that time, I certainly didn't think about the bystanders who were affected. And I'm certainly very well aware now and been reminded. And so I think it's time for us as a city and certainly the province who owns the bridge. And I know in 2017 they had $500,000 set aside. And then provincially it went away. I just think the least we can do is ask the province to get it back on their table. And really, I guess that's all the motion speaks to at this point, is sending a letter to the Minister of Transportation, and if council endorses it, I am happy to, I'll follow up with the minister myself and see if I can have a conversation and say, look, St. John Council's asked, and see what I can do. So I guess that's my motion.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Oops. So just reading the motion earlier today, City Manager, can you just bring us up to speed on what we did do after the last discussion?
So, Your Worship, members of council, clearly I wasn't here in 2017, but based on the records, when this was brought forward in 2017, council expressed a number of different reservations, none on the general principle of doing some sort of suicide barriers on the bridge. That was not a reservation expressed by council. The reservations expressed by council was whether or not there had been enough stakeholder engagement with those people who would be affected by a change in the appearance to the bridge, from our tourist industry to businesses, etc., and also what that suicide barrier would look like moving forward. So council did direct the city manager of the time to write a letter to the Ministry of Transportation asking them to consult more broadly on this issue prior to developing, before council could support any formal plan. Admittedly, since that time, there has been no follow-up from the city staff with the Ministry of Transportation, and to this day, we're not sure where they sit on this particular issue. So for us to re-engage with the Ministry of Transportation, I would suggest is appropriate to see where they are in terms of the follow-up from the letter that was sent to them in February of 2017.
Okay, thank you, sir. Councillor Hickey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just wanting to speak in favor of the motion. I mean, I just finished reading a Telegraph article of a near avoidance of this exact situation just later last week. So the need for this in the community is obviously quite apparent, and in today's with the level of openness and availability in which we have mental health conversations around mental health, in which I hope continue to better and continue to increase. I think this is exactly something we need to look at, and a letter we need to write to the minister. Obviously, I hope no one in our community ever ends up in that situation, but unfortunately, many of them do. So, yes, I will definitely be supporting this motion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reardon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll support the motion. I'll be curious to hear what the province has to say. Where I have my struggle with all of this is that $500,000 is a lot of money, and it doesn't impact mental health. It just prevents someone who has mental health issues from using a bridge. And when you look up suicide, firearms is the number 1, and hanging is number 2, and poisoning is number 3, and gases is number 4, and jumping's number 5. So you still have a huge range of opportunities to commit suicide if you're so inclined and you have that mental state. So that's where I have my struggle of spending $500,000 on some sort of a caging system that would prevent that. I'd love to see that $500,000 put into mental health issues to actually get to the root of the problem and change some people's lives. And when you look at employment, and you look at housing, and you look at violence, and you look at substance abuse, if you put your money there, you could change mental health issues for a lot of people. Anyways, but I will support this to hear where this dialogue's going. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I can support it, but I think we have to also, in this letter, we have to be a bit concerned about the design of some fence up on the reversing falls. I mean, we just got a restaurant that rents space from the city. They put a lot of money into that restaurant, and that's why in 2017 we were concerned about erecting any kind of a fence on that bridge, because a lot of tourists go to, that's probably our number 1 tourist spot in St. John, reversing falls, and people walk the bridge. And you got to be concerned about the height of the fence and what it looks like, because I don't know whether it's going to prevent people from jumping off if they have a mindset to do that, because unless you cover the edges of the bridge on both, entering the bridge on both sides, you'd have to put the fence, extend that out, because you can walk down. You can get down on both sides of that bridge. People can actually get in there and walk through on the railroad tracks. So, I mean, it's got to be a certain type of fence that can go more than just across the bridge. It's got to go across the ends of the bridge so that you can't get down inside, underneath there. So it's not going to be a cheap proposition, and if the province goes back and says it's our expense, well, we'll have to face it then, because, you know, it's unfortunate, but in our society we can't always prevent people from doing things that we don't want them to do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor, you're first. Can I go to someone else first and then come back to you? Thank you. Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, I appreciate what Councillor Sullivan's promoting, but I think if they take the lead from San Francisco, they just put a net under it. Because we saw the designs they sent to us. They were horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And to be perfectly blunt and not politically correct, they just walk across to the train bridge. I know it's sad, but that's what it is. So the only way, when they painted the bridge, they had a net on either side outstretched at least 8 feet. And I believe there was, the police department could tell you better, but I don't think there was any jumpers during that time. And that's, I believe they put that on the Golden Gate Bridge. Anyway, just, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to go to the first speaker. Councillor McKenzie, you didn't speak yet. No, thank you. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Worship. I think Councillor Reardon's right on the money. I mean, prevention is the key, and you know, I have no problem supporting this motion. I think that, you know, if it saves one life, it's well worth it. But I think that, you know, everything we do that way will save a life here and there if you put the money into programming and you know, different types of help, you know, for people. I think it gets more, you know, mileage. But I'll be supporting it. But I think that we need to do more for mental health. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Norton.
Yeah, no, thank you, Your Worship. I'll certainly support the motion. I think lots of people have echoed the fact that it's bringing significant attention to the fact that there's a much deeper issue than just the fence. It's mental health, mental fitness, all of those factors, and you don't have to look much further than our own St. John Police Force and their calls for service that are related to mental health related issues in comparison to some of the other cities around our province, where we need significant help to provide our first responders and those folks that call upon them for service, to get those folks right on the ground as soon as we interface with them, the proper help from trained mental health practitioners to prevent cases like this before they get to the bridge. And often they're the first ones for a call for service, and where they end up after that, if they don't get the proper mental health first aid treatment from somebody other than a law enforcement officer, that their job is getting increasingly complicated, is difficult. So we need more programs. We need obviously more interventions, and we need the right people and practices in place. And until then, we're going to be looking at more safety nets and fences to prevent needless deaths. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I would agree with a lot of the comments that I think we have a mental health crisis on our hands, and we wouldn't have enough nets. I think we can't lose sight of the root issues and the amount of pain and suffering that folks have a spouse who's just leaving the corporation after 28 years because there's a lot of challenges in delivering mental health services. So, Councillor Sullivan, wrap us up.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Council. You know, whether it's a fence, whether it's a net, you know, I think barrier is the key term, and I am no expert in it. So I guess I will leave the actual function and form to the experts. I do know in my research, Canadian research says it's effective not just in stopping people from committing suicide, but overall suicide rates. Quite often, if the bridge of choice, this is Toronto data, wasn't available, by the time somebody would go to move or have another decision, they were able to get help, have second thoughts, and there was a statistical decrease. We certainly need more mental health support in St. John, in programs, in ongoing support, in partnerships with our police force. And I am so glad that so many councillors have echoed that, and I hope we carry that away with us in our conversations going away tonight. You know, as a first bit of the conversation, thank you for, I think what I heard was support around the table for moving this forward.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Okay, I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not saying any. Thank you. Common Clerk. Next item.
Your Worship, the final councillor submission is item 11.7 on your agenda. It's the sustainability report submitted by Councillor McKenzie.
Okay, Councillor?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll read my motion, then if I get a second, I'll give you some background. That in the spirit of open, transparent governance, direct the city manager to have staff provide background information on the New Deal, the immediate need in terms of first phase of tax reform on heavy industry taxes, the Government of New Brunswick response, and a template on the City of St. John's website. These tools should be completed and posted by August 1st, 2019. I just wanted to add to that too, because I see I missed it. I wanted to add in contact names and numbers for provincial representation if people wanted to discuss it with them to make it more easier. So if I get a second, I'll give. Okay, so I think it's important for us to be as open and transparent as possible regarding the deal being offered to the City of St. John, what it covers for the whole province versus what is only for St. John, what we need to get us from now until possible legislative changes can be made in 2022, 2023, in terms of first phase of tax reform of heavy industry tax being retained by the municipalities. I would like all this information put on the City of St. John's webpage. In addition to this, I'd like to add, I'd like to be fair and add the contact information for all MLAs in the region so that people can contact them and discuss their perspectives on this. People need to have an easy tool to find out what the offer is and what's good as well as what's lacking in it for St. John to be successful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, don't see any lights. Okay, City Manager?
Your Worship, members of council, if you are supportive of the councillor's motion, you'll be happy to know that the backgrounder that he has described is already written in draft form. It's just going through its final review phases. It does, councillor, also include the email addresses for all the members of the Legislative Assembly who have a role to play in this. And I do anticipate, for the information of council, that backgrounder will be ready for release within the next 1 to 2 days.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. Motion's carried. Next item, come please.
12.1 on your agenda is a standing item entitled Sustainability Update.
Oh, okay. I thought we were moving along. I jumped right to the 15s. Okay, City Manager.
We're only at 12, Your Worship.
Yeah.
Hate to break the news to you. Your Worship, members of council, because sustainability and the sustainability initiatives to address the entirety of our deficit for 2021 and 2022, and in support of the mayor's motion from this evening as well, there is no doubt that sustainability will become the topic of the day for the foreseeable future. Therefore, we are proposing, first of all, a standing agenda item whereby the staff will report back to you at every council meeting and provide you an update on the various sustainability initiatives, and that will also help inform the public as to where we sit on the various initiatives. So you see it on the agenda this evening as the first of what will be many sustainability updates. For this evening, the only thing I will provide to you is an update on what the staff has done in the last 2 weeks since the motion on the question of support for the Sustaining St. John, a 3-part plan, was tabled. We have provided feedback via email to my co-chair and key members of the Sustainability Working Group at the provincial level, offering them various observations as to what they should or could consider modifying within Sustaining St. John, a 3-part plan, to seek additional support from this council. Those emails have been forwarded. As I said, there have been a couple of conversations. They have acknowledged receipt of our thoughts and ideas, and basically, to use a phrase, the bottom line is, we'll get back to you, is basically where we sit at this point in time. I have no other information for you in that regard. and it would be inappropriate for me to offer any more recommendations or observations on the plan itself, since that has been, the questions of support for that plan has been tabled for a 30-day period. So that's all I have, subject to your questions in terms of an update on sustainability for this evening.
Received, file.
Thank you. Okay, on the question, all those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any, thank you. Motion's carried. Next item, come clear.
Your worship, item 12.2 on the agenda is a staff report with respect to demolition of vacant, dilapidated, and dangerous building at 174 Pitt Street.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hamilton?
Yes, Your Worship, members of council, these next two files continue momentum on the city's Enhanced Dangerous Buildings program as staff continue to accelerate our efforts to target compliance in the city. These are important files linked to creating the conditions for investment and growth, in particular on the Central Peninsula where the next two properties are located. With the resolution of these files, the city's year-to-date progress stands at 37 closed cases with a year-end target of 80, with the majority of these cases being repaired and reoccupied, which is the optimal outcome. With that, I would hand it over to Ms. Catherine Lowe, the city's technical services engineer, to provide a brief overview on each of these files.
Good evening, Your Worship and councillors. I do have a slideshow showing the buildings, but it's not up on the screen. Okay, we're all set. So I will be providing a brief overview of two files tonight. So as Jacqueline mentioned, the first one being 174 Pitt Street. So this building is a 3-story, 3-unit apartment building. A compliance inspection was conducted at the building last Monday in preparation for tonight's meeting, just to confirm that it remains in the same condition as when the notice to comply was issued. However, on that same day, last Monday, an application for a demo permit was made on behalf of the owner. So I followed up with the contractor hired by the owner, and they confirmed that the demolition would be completed within 30 days of the permit being issued, and the permit was issued today. So I am still recommending that we get approval to do the demolition in case the owner's plans are stalled and the demolition doesn't happen within the 30 days that was confirmed to us. So in your packet, pages 300 to 309 show the photos that I'll be presenting to you. So this first photo is just an aerial showing where the building's located. So it's on the corner of Pitt Street and Mecklenburg Street in the south end of the Central Peninsula. Yes, so that was all the good stuff.
Okay.
So if there's any comments or questions.
Okay, thank you. Somebody want to move the recommendation? Thanks. I think you moved it, Councillor McKenzie first, and we'll have Councillor Hickey second it. Thank you. And Councillor Reardon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I noticed, excuse me, that it's Fred Savoy, I believe is the owner.
Yes.
Lives in Quispamsis. Catherine, it would be interesting in these, by the way, for the public, there are two demolition of vacant buildings on our agenda tonight. There are a total of 70 pages of staff time. We will not get that money back of what the staff have put into preparing this. We will get the money back for the actual demolition from the province at the end of the day. That to me is unacceptable, but it is the way it is. One thing that would be interesting, I think, for council is to have the assessed values also put in there. the peninsula is only so big, and right now we've spent $200,000 on a neighborhood action plan for it. So the land space there is limited. People are looking for land on the peninsula. I believe it's undervalued, especially the vacant buildings, and I blame the province of New Brunswick, not the current government, continually the province of New Brunswick that has undervalued and underassessed the buildings. Especially this type of building, because at the end of the day, when you don't pay much in the way of property taxes, you don't bother to fix up your property. So I guess we're incenting this to a certain extent. Anyways, that's all my comments for on this one. But thank you very much. I really appreciate the work you guys are doing. It makes a huge difference, especially on the peninsula where there's not much land.
Yeah.
To get rid of a couple of buildings, huge. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hickey. Sorry, Councillor Reardon, Councillor Hickey, there you go.
Not to repeat Councillor Reardon, but certainly echoing her comments on that, and just voicing support on this. Thank you all for your leadership on this. It's always great to see some issues get dealt with, especially on the Central Peninsula and in any of our denser neighborhoods. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Couple of quick comments and then we'll move on. So again, I say almost the same thing. I think Councillor Reardon identifies who the owner is. And I said just a symbol of, of the root challenges that we face. It's been going on for 40, 50 years. That's why the discussions that we're having around our sustainability and the working group report are so critically important to get at the root causes. And I don't sleep much and I drink a lot of coffee. So I drive around a lot of neighborhoods, and you get out of about 7 higher end neighborhoods in St. John, and this is what you see, street after street after street, which is an indicator that we're broken. That's why we need boldness around this. So the other comment I'd make is that we have very capable owners who are absolutely walking away from their responsibility and leaving it to the city to do hundreds of hours worth of work, hire the contractors to go out and do this work, and then probably they've figured out some way to get a 50 cent on the dollar discount at the other end to get their house ripped down for less money. I'm speculating, but that's one of the issues that we face, I think. So. Councillor, do you want to jump in with a comment before I read
I was just going to say maybe we need to invent a sunshine list for all of these people that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right? Let's embarrass them publicly. Facebook and Twitter, do your thing.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. So I'll read the demolition statement. The information which has been provided in the council kit includes the report of the building inspector stating that the building located at 174 Pitt Street, PID 00006403, is a hazard to the safety of the public by virtue of its being, amongst other things, dilapidated or structurally unsound. Is there present an owner, including anyone holding any encumbrance upon this property, who wishes to present evidence to the contrary, i.e. that the building is structurally sound and not dilapidated? Not seeing any. Thank you. I'll call the question on the recommendation. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. The motion's carried. Next item.
12.3 on the agenda, Your Worship's another building demolition for a building at 261 to 263 Wentworth Street and 214 Britton Street.
Okay, and Ms. Hamilton, will we just roll right into this again? Okay, thank you. After you.
So this building is also located in the south end of the Central Peninsula. So it spans Wentworth Street and Britton Street as indicated by the 2 civic numbers. So this is a 2-story single-family house. The building has clearly experienced some uneven foundation settlement that has caused the building to be severely warped and structurally unsound. And then these conditions are also affecting the neighboring buildings at 212 Britton Street and 127 to 129 Broad Street. So photos of the building's exterior and interior are found on pages 337 to 345, and I'll flip through them on the screen.
Okay, thank you. Somebody would like to move the recommendation? Moved by the deputy, thank you. Seconded, I think it was Councillor Sullivan? Yep, thank you. Moved by the deputy, seconded by Councillor Sullivan. Thank you. Councillor Reardon.
I just wanted to publicly say this one's owned by Bruce Wayne Carr, whoever he is, on Meehan Street in the city of St. John. Again, on the peninsula, it's prime property. And I remember years ago when my kids went to that school, there was another structure. And if I don't know if this Bruce Wayne Carr owned it then, but they took the structure down and they bundled it all up and they put it over for garbage and for the city of St. John to take it. That was
I
years
think that
ago.
was just before we canceled the bulk pickup.
That,
perhaps,
exactly.
So.
That's what happened. We took a house away that day.
Yeah.
Anyways, great to see it all happening again. It would, like I say, it would be great to have the assessed value in the kit just to demonstrate how undervalued the land is on the peninsula at least. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's certainly something from a growth committee's perspective that we've spoken about many times. I mean, this has been a priority from day one. We do have a motion, I think, later tonight to continue to fund this work, but certainly the recovery of all of our costs as well. Are there mechanisms to not only recover the tear down of the building, but also to bill back? And I think our staff continue to try to wrap their heads around how do we also bill, just like somebody in the legal profession would bill the billable hours, because these are taxpayers paying for the management of these files, and they're extensive. So thanks again. So I'll read again the notice for demolition. The information which has been provided in the council kit includes the report of the building inspector stating that buildings located at 261 to 263 Wentworth Street and 214 Britton Street, PID 0001149, is a hazard to the safety of the public by virtue of its being, amongst other things, dilapidated or structurally unsound. Is there present an owner, including anyone holding an encumbrance upon this property, who wishes to present evidence to the contrary, i.e. that the building is structurally sound and not dilapidated? No. Thank you. I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lowe, for all your continued work. Common Clerk, next item.
Agenda item 12.4, Your Worship, is a request to set public hearing date and updated Heritage Conservation Areas bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hamilton? Yep, Ms. Hamilton.
Your Worship, members of council, tonight is council's first step in the legislative process to initiate the first phase of amendments to the city's heritage bylaw. This review, which was prioritized by council as part of your priorities, will bring much needed reforms to modernize the bylaw, allow for much improved flexibility, clarity, and predictability for investors in the city's heritage areas, which are a key growth area for the city. Staff have prepared a brief presentation for council to highlight the major features of the first phase of heritage bylaws that will be considered by Common Council at a public hearing scheduled for September 9th. And Ms. Emma Sampson, the city's heritage officer, will be delivering this evening's presentation. I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the significant staff, Heritage Board, and community effort that has gone into the development of the suite of amendments before you this evening.
Oh, a microphone for you. Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. We are pleased to present to Common Council the first of two phases of the revisions to the Heritage Conservation Areas bylaw. These modernizations, developed over the past 2 years, will help to introduce more clarity, efficiency, and most importantly, flexibility to the Heritage Conservation Service. Tonight we will be introducing this first phase of updates at a high level and requesting that Common Council set a public hearing date of September 9th. These revisions come to you tonight by way of the Central Peninsula Plan project. Both phases of the Heritage Bylaw amendments were developed together with the Central Peninsula Plan itself. This is to ensure that the development process on the Central Peninsula is clearer and friendlier, responsive to what we heard through neighborhood plan engagement. You'll note that there are two phases to the modernized Heritage Bylaw. The first phase is what will be presented tonight. The second phase covers new construction, or infill, in heritage conservation areas. Because height for these projects will be covered through the zoning bylaw, this second phase is paired with the adoption of the Central Peninsula Plan, which will come in the fall. The package of revisions that is being moved forward as Phase 1 consists of two distinct parts. The first part, which forms the more substantial portion, has come as a result of public engagements, focus groups, and workshops over the past 2 years. Again, it includes all planned revisions to the Heritage Bylaw, with the exception of new buildings. The second part of tonight's Phase 1 revisions are 3 external requests for bylaw amendments. I will provide more information on these items shortly, but to summarize, they are a request for the removal of designation for the King Street West Heritage Conservation Area, a request for a single site designation at 152 Watson Street, and a request for a site-specific height amendment for the proposed Telegraph Building. The planned Phase 1 revisions to modernize the Heritage Bylaw fall into 3 categories: general housekeeping, exemptions, and demolition. To help increase flexibility and efficiency for heritage property owners, a number of new exemptions from heritage permitting are proposed. Under the current bylaw, a heritage permit is required for almost all exterior work on every side of a building. With the proposed changes, a heritage permit would no longer be required for some of the most common alterations on sides of the buildings that aren't public-facing. Exemptions are also being proposed for certain common-sense types of signage, such as real estate and election signs, and for some areas of commercial signage, such as window decals. To give a sense of what the biggest area of exemptions looks like, parts of buildings will be considered non-visible, that is, what cannot be easily seen by someone walking down the street. This includes the rears of properties and portions of sidewalls determined through a quick and easy calculation. In these areas, replacement of windows and doors with no change in size would no longer require a heritage permit and would allow property owners to choose materials better suited to their budgets rather than requiring the use of traditional materials. As well, decks, stairs, fences, and siding, but not masonry, will also be exempt from heritage permits in this area, or in these areas. These 2 groups make up the majority of work that people carry out on their heritage property and represent over half of heritage permits currently issued this year. They are alterations that have minimal impact on the overall form of the property and can be easily reversed. On street-facing facades, the recent increase in flexibility through the approval of aluminum-clad wood windows, in addition to wood windows, will continue. For demolition, the general process has remained the same. A heritage permit can be applied for and issued through one of 2 paths: finding the property incompatible with the area, which is now known as having no public benefit, or through listing the property for sale. The provisions around both of these paths through the updates have been streamlined and strengthened, increasing clarity of process to give heritage buildings a better chance at a second chance. This is achieved through items such as required public advertising on buildings that are proposed for demolition and requiring a 12-month listing period rather than 6 months. So a key factor in this, as mentioned, is increasing public awareness when an application has been made to demolish a building. Following best practice in other major municipalities, large format signage will be required on the property while the application is being considered. As well, provisions have been included to curb the possibility of demolition without permits, with the Heritage Development Board able to require the reconstruction of an illegally demolished heritage property. Included with the planned revisions, there are 3 amendment requests made by external parties. These have been included in this Phase 1 because of timing and because related policy changes were being considered before the requests were made. These will be discussed in more detail in the report for the public hearing, but to provide a brief overview, there is the request for removal of designation on the King Street West Heritage Conservation Area. Council's removal of designation for the St. George's Church and Rectory in the King Street West Heritage Conservation Area and the low investment and participation in the Heritage Program had flagged the removal of designation for the whole property as a potential outcome. The submission of a petitioned request from a property owner in the area, along with a survey of all remaining property owners, turned that into an active request. Both staff and the board have regretfully recommended its removal. The second request is a request for designation at 152 Watson Street. This is a spot designation request for a single property on the Lower West Side, just a few blocks south of King Street West. The consideration of a change in policy to focus on collections of buildings and to limit spot designations had been planned before this request had been made. The Heritage Conservation's program's success has been best exemplified in larger, denser areas such as Trinity Royal, with spot designations better suited to public buildings of community importance. The staff report and the board's recommendation to council are both to deny the request for designation. The last external request is a site-specific amendment for height for the Telegraph at Canterbury and Grannon Streets. This is an amendment request for only the height standard for a proposed development at the southwest corner of Canterbury and Grannon Streets. It would allow the overall building height to be a few meters taller than the maximum allowed height through the bylaw. And this request is being reviewed next week by the Heritage Development Board at its August meeting, with its recommendation to follow for the public hearing. So the Central Peninsula Plan, together with the Phase 2 Heritage Bylaw amendments, which are building infill, is coming in the fall. The plan has been reformatted for ease of use and to be more responsive to the community's feedback. Part of the reformatting is to create a community action strategy as an independent document which will allow for the city to partner with community members. This will accomplish tangible actions that improve quality of life, unlock growth potential, and enhance customer service delivery. And you will hear more about this in the coming months. So upcoming to continue to move this process along is a public house in August for both the Central Peninsula Plan and the Heritage Bylaw. If so moved by Council tonight, the public hearing for these Phase 1 revisions to the Heritage Bylaw will be on September 9th, and the Central Peninsula Plan adoption process, including Phase 2 revisions for the Heritage Bylaw, will begin in the fall. So thank you, and I would be happy to field any questions.
Okay, thank you. Would somebody like to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Reardon, seconded by Councillor Hickey. Thank you. Deputy Mayor, first up.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. I just wondered, on the height of the building, you're talking about the telegraph, but will that, when you change the bylaw, or when the bylaw is adjusted, have your public hearing, you're going to apply that to all buildings in the South Central? I mean, or just that one building? Like if somebody wants to build, it's always been, you know, a few years ago, somebody wanted to build an apartment building down in the south end, and it was, you know, we didn't allow that height of a building. So we've changed that, I think, if it's outside the heritage area now, but can it be in the heritage area and have a height of a building higher than what we have now?
Yes, so through your worship to the deputy, because this application is being considered under the current infill standards, the site-specific amendment is just to allow the additional height for this proposed project. Under the new infill standards, height would no longer fall within the heritage bylaw. It would be governed through the zoning bylaw only. So those regulations would be determined through a specific
And that will
mapping.
be for heritage areas also?
Yes, that is correct.
And so the other two items on the west side, do they have to go through a public hearing too?
Yes, they do.
They do. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reardon.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's interesting with the height restrictions because I guess the original spirit of it was so that you would maintain some sort of a continuity with height.
Yes.
So when I read this, I was just wondering, so it could be any height as long as it fits with the zoning?
For new infill?
Right.
Yeah, it would have to meet the height maps in the zoning bylaw.
In the zoning bylaw. Yeah. Okay. Now, the other question I have is, St. John's Heritage is its brand, and it's so obvious when you aren't from St. John, but that's the way with everything, right? When you come here, you see it. And so it is nice to have the guidelines and to try to support people who want to save the buildings and do what they can with those sorts of things. But I guess at the end of the day, is there any opportunity for us to look at? Because the other thing I could do is, I like that it's been extended from 6 months to a year. Now, if you want to get a demolition permit, you have to put it up for sale for a year. But if I don't want to do that because I'm afraid someone might buy that, if I put it up at its assessed value, which is nothing probably because it's vacant, then what I do is I do nothing, but I just turn off the heat. And then I put some boards up on it, and then I wait until it becomes a menace to the population. And then the city will go after me and tear it down. So, like, it doesn't make sense. So is there any opportunity for us to look at how could we impact that? I'm watching that right now on King Street East happening. And yeah, the one on the corner. So I guess, is there any opportunity for us to impact that situation? Not that specific situation, but the situation where I just turn the heat off and board the property up and I just let it fall down and become a public hazard, and then it can get torn down by the city or whatever. Or I can have an order, placed on my door to demolish the building for structural integrity.
Yes, that was certainly a consideration, a strong consideration by the Heritage Development Board and by staff in crafting demolition regulations. And while we're uncertain as to what the easy answer is for this round of amendments, we will certainly be looking at how we can integrate with dangerous and vacant in the future to try and find a best solution.
Just happy to hear it's on the radar. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have the recommendation on the floor. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Okay, thank you. Anyone opposed or contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. Thank you all for the work, to yourself, to the board, and everyone else that's been doing great work. Thank you. Common Clerk? Next item.
Next item, Your Worship, 13.1 on your agenda. It's from the Finance Committee entitled 2020 and 2021 General Fund Capital Budget. Okay, and I'm going to send this over to the Finance Chair, I believe. You're going to make some comments? Okay, thank you. Okay, there you go.
I'll read the motion first. At a meeting, it was resolved that the Finance Committee recommend that the 2020 and 21 proposed draft general fund capital budget be presented to Common Council and recommendation to receive and file. So, second. Thanks, Ray. So,
would you like to move not to hear the presentation, Councillor?
Well, it's only a draft. We're going to hear it again come budget time. So
the Commissioner's been practicing all night. He wants to just do it for a few minutes.
So before we get to Mr. Fudge, I'll just say, and I'm sure he'll reiterate it, this is the first time you're going to see a 2-year capital budget, okay? We've done it year by year. This is the first 2-year budget. We put an emphasis on borrowing less money. We're doing that every year. 2020, we're looking at borrowing $11 million and then down to 10.5 in 2021. And the total of the budgets are about $50 million, okay, over 2 years. $29 million being funded from other sources, and we fund about $21 million of it. So after that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Fudge. Thank you, sir.
And good evening, Your Worship, members of council. Nothing better than a 9 o'clock budget presentation, I'm sure. Yeah, this evening, the chair covered it very well. This evening, we're very pleased to present for the first time a multi-year capital budget. The investment in the community in this capital budget represents over $50 million in investment. But at the same time, interesting enough, it represents the lowest level of new borrowing in a capital budget that I've seen since being commissioner, with plans for years 2020 and 2021 to borrow less than $11 million for each of those years. And now, mind you, 2020 is $10,998,800, but I'll take every win I can get. So the proposed capital budget takes advantage to the greatest extent more than $29 million in funding from other levels of government. And I'll just take a little bit of time on this slide, and it'll allow us to go faster on the rest. Just a bit of an overview. So our view is this budget, this capital proposal, strikes the right balance in supporting council's priorities, being the asset management plan with target focus on addressing the infrastructure deficit, and is in line with the requirements set out in Common Council's capital budget policy. And I'm just going to give some illustrative examples. So with respect to the growth agenda, the capital budget supports growth with planned infrastructure renewal in the Central Peninsula in areas such as St. James Street, Germain Street, as well as the Fundy Quay, and as well as other areas out throughout the city such as Milledgeville with a storm sewer separation project that is expected to improve capacity in that area. The overall capital budget, 22% of the capital budget represents investments that support growth. In terms of climate change, the city is also being strategic in renewing assets that are beyond its useful life, which will reduce its energy and carbon footprint through projects such as the opportunity to commence Phase 1 of a district energy project, a deep energy retrofit program focused on our city facilities, and finally the refurbishment of the seawall on the Fundy Quay, which will mitigate future risk of storm surge to property in the Central Peninsula, as well as unlocking development potential. In regards to recreation, the city will continue to invest in recreation with significant third and final investment in the St. John Fieldhouse on the east side, an investment in the playground at Marketplace on the west side, as well as improvements to the Carleton Community Centre on the west side. In addition to infrastructure replacements at LBR, Lord Beaverbrook Rink, Peter Murray Arena, Harbor Station, and the Aquatic Center. From a customer service perspective, the proposed budget makes transformational proposed investment in improving citizen customer service experience with a significant technology investment in a new ERP system. An ERP system is quite a large undertaking, and it's a multi-year project which will replace the city's current system, which is over 20 years old. An ERP system is the backbone of any company's ability to deliver services and online experiences to its customers. A modern system will foster better customer communication, improve the city's customer service response, and self-service options for access to information and services. As part of our long-term financial plan, the Finance Committee will be recommending a 10-year capital investment plan later this year. So just, I guess tonight we're looking at a multi-year capital budget, 2-year capital budget. Service areas have commenced and actually completed submitting draft 10-year submissions to the Finance Department, for which proposed long-term capital investment plan will be brought forward later this year and reviewed by the Finance Committee. The goal is by the end of this year that the city will take significant strides with our long-term financial plan towards having a strategic and integrated fiscal management framework, integrating best practice financial policies, financial targets, key performance indicators, and long-term debt targets, asset management targets, and operating plans. So with respect to our debt reduction, as the Finance Committee has approved some ambitious targets, we're looking for a 25% reduction over the next 10 years in our infrastructure deficit, as well as 25% reduction in our long-term debt position. And to be able to accomplish that, that will involve a significant increase in pay-as-you-go capital in our operating budgets that we'll see in our draft budgets being proposed later this year. With respect to our debt, last time we brought a debt update to the Common Council, we showed a graph that illustrated in 2014 we had a little bit over $119 million in long-term debt at the general fund, and we said we were currently tracking at $106 million in long-term debt. We're forecasting now, based on our capital budgets, that we expect the long-term debt position to go reduce further to $102 million by the end of 2019. So in terms of our proposed $50.6 million capital budget, again, city share over 2 years is $21.4 million. The other share representing $29 million, that includes gas tax funding, disaster mitigation funding that we've already have approved, reserve funding, applications for bilateral funding, federal and provincial, significant increase in pay-as-you-go into our operating budgets, as well as we're pursuing another federal program with respect to the projects, the Deep Municipal Energy Retrofit Project and District Energy. So in terms of our focus on tax-based growth, our total investment for the seawall, I think this question was asked the last time I was up here presenting, is approximately $8.2 million. The funding partnership with the federal government includes $3.27 million from the federal government and the City of St. John at $4.9 million. Again, that's built into this budget. It's over 2 years. The first, in 2020, the city will invest about a third of its share and 2/3 of its share in 2021. Strategic reinvestments in Milledgeville, storm project at $1 million, creating more capacity for development. And I mentioned these other streets in my opening. Balancing infrastructure replacement and climate change mitigation. Again, a high focus on assets that are at risk of failure with respect to our asset management program. $8.9 million investment in sewer separation, resulting also in complete street reconstruction, and $7.8 million in continued investment in low carbon projects, energy efficiency measures, and again with the focus of reducing our carbon footprint, but also focusing on assets that are beyond their useful life. Other investments and highlights for the in terms of this budget, 98% of this budget focuses on infrastructure deficit. Fire station, $200,000 for 3 facilities with respect to new roofs. City Market, roof replacement. Carleton Community Center for foundation exterior work and transit bus shelters. Trade and Convention Center, $260,000 for replacing outdated equipment technology. And Harbor Station, There's some commitments with respect to the Sea Dogs and some other upgrades with the facility. Fleet replacement over 2 years, over $4 million. And again, this is a good news story with respect to our reserve program and funding that completely out of operations. Arena equipment renewal at $475,000. I mentioned the $3 million ERP project for information technology. The other million, 1.6, represents our computer replacement program that's also funded out of reserves. Parking meter replacement of $226,000, and Parks and Recreation, I mentioned that earlier with respect to Marketplace. And I mentioned the field house, and just in conclusion, again, we believe this focuses on our key priorities. 98% of this budget is targeting infrastructure deficit, while at the same time, 22% of this reinvestment is directly tied to growth. And with that, if there's any questions, there's all the commissioners are in the room that have contributed greatly to this proposed budget. I have my staff here, and we'll be looking for feedback tonight on the proposed budget. And again, we're recommending receive and file.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Worship. Commissioner, this is fantastic. Absolutely. I mean, in the 3 years I've been here, and I'm not much of a finance guy, but there's so many strides been made since I've been here. First, we didn't have any budget. You just waited till a month and then you do contracts. This is a 2-year budget. And on our last year's budget, if you remember, Commissioner Hugenholtz and Brent, we saved about $3 million because we let the contracts out early. I mean, this is what you call, this is just great business. We're doing good business with this finance stuff. And I'm sure, and I'd like to ask, I don't know who can answer, Brent or Michael, because it's a 2-year budget, will the contracts be let out like 2 years in advance, or is that too far, or 1 year at a time for the work to be done?
Good evening, Your Worship. Yeah, so it'll allow us to begin designs ahead of time and prepare things such that we are ready to issue tenders early like we did this year. So it will only help us in getting them out earlier, and possibly earlier than we have over this past year.
I mean, it's tough to beat. You had them all out in February. I mean, that's pretty tough to beat, you know. I know you beat everybody in the province by having them out. And another question for Kevin. On the assets, and the ones that are coming due, like rinks, would the option be on the table to sell these rinks or get rid of these rinks when their life is due, I think, in the next 3 years, if I remember what Tim O'Reilly said?
Yeah, so everything, the vast majority of the investments in here are, I guess, investments that RV Anderson is classified as being rated as an F, so they're beyond their useful life. If there was a desire of council to look into something like that, this is a proposed budget. Timing can be factored into over the year to allow council to make those type of decisions. But certainly if council was interested in that, strategically going down that road, we would incorporate that into our spending plans.
Thank you. I know it's just a receive and file, but this is great news. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So 9 p.m. budgets are good news, Commissioner. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Just a couple questions. If the government changes the legislation for major facilities and all the costs that you have here for the trade convention, harbor station, then we would, I don't know how that's going to work, and I don't know when it's going to happen, but would this be, I guess if they were going to change it in time, or at least by the early 2020, then these costs would be shared.
Through your worship, currently the City of St. John's proportionate share of operating is 67% and 100% of capital. So you're right. If legislation was changed on regional facilities, our estimates with all participation in the regional facilities, St. John's share would drop from 67% down to about 59%, and that would be applied to both operating and capital.
Right. And the only other question is that the St. John market, when we had the funding from the federal and provincial, I guess the roof wasn't included. Everything else seemed to be, because we got new windows, it's kind of funny that the roof wasn't included. We did an overhaul of the city market.
Mr. Yemen, take this question.
Through your worship, when we did the project for the city market, we did not include completely the roof as part of our project submission. Was not
So
included.
was there
there.
some reason why the roof wasn't included? Not that, I guess it's too late
I
now.
do recall what in 2014, when we put the application, we did not have enough information to look at the whole project and to determine whether we need to do the roof or whether we need not to do the roof here. So we didn't have enough information when we put the application, so we did not put it as part of the application, as I recall in 2014.
No, that's too bad.
Yeah.
We could have got a new roof.
But,
at
however-
a third of the price.
However, most of we have maximized the funding from both the provincial and the federal government on the city market.
Yes, I know. So that funding is completed, but it's too bad the roof hadn't been in. But I just wondered, because everything else has been replaced pretty much up there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy. I just don't see any other lights. Just a couple of quick comments, Commissioner. It's not necessarily for some folks maybe the sort of the most exciting topic, but it is the most critical topic. So you know, to you, to your staff, to the Finance Committee, you know, I'm incredibly enthused and proud of the policies, the long-term planning, the long-term actions that are starting to take shape, you know, so that future councils can be, you know, relay race runners as opposed to, you know, starting and stopping, you know, potentially. And we're starting to lay out really long-term planning and actions, reducing the general fund debt from 117 to 102 by the end of 2019, long-term financial plans. So there's a lot to celebrate. The way we've leveraged federal funds, 21 million for 29 million and other sources of funds to move some of these projects forward. And ultimately, I guess, just to embed the discipline in our policies to follow these over the long term. So I think it is a great news budget tonight because it's propped up with a foundation of long-term thinking, you know, planning rather, actions, discipline, and you know, we really appreciate the work that you've done, that the chair of our Finance Committee has done, Councillor Merrithew, and everybody else behind it. So thank you very much. Okay, can I have a receive and file, folks? Moved by the deputy, seconded by Councillor Hickey. Thank you. And on the question, all those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. And Councillor Merrithew, can I go back to you for next item, Common Clerk, and I'll go back to you for. Oh. There you go.
13.2, Your Worship, another Finance Committee report on the 2020 and 2021 proposed water and sewerage utility fund capital budget.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Merrithew, would you introduce as a chair of Finance, please?
Absolutely. So at the meeting, it was resolved that the Finance Committee recommend the 2020-21 proposed draft utility fund budget to be presented to Common Council with a recommendation to receive and file. Again, Your Worship, this is a first two-year budget we've seen for the utility, so we'll pass it on to Brent after that. Thank you.
Okay, welcome, Mr. McGovern. Thank you.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. The proposed 2021 utility capital budget before you this evening was presented to Finance Committee on May 29th and July 18th. The proposed budget, similar to Commissioner Fudge had mentioned, this one is also aligned with Council's priorities, the asset management plan, capital budget policy, the Central Peninsula Neighborhood Plan, and in addition, it prepares the utility for climate-related challenges. This proposed two-year utility capital budget was prepared with input from senior leadership team, engineering, transportation and environment, growth and community development, Develop SJ, and the Finance Committee. The total two-year proposed capital two-year program for 2020 and 2021 totals $26,215,000. And as has been reported through the State of the Infrastructure report that flowed out of the asset management project, the infrastructure deficit for the utility is very sizable at just over $300 million. Therefore, we are working hard to ensure that ratepayers' dollars are stretched through our efforts in terms of finding matching dollars from the other levels of government. Of the $26,250,000 $15,000 that's in the proposed 2-year budget. $10,283,450 is proposed to come from the utility budget over 2 years, so just over $5.1 million each year. $5.1 million each year, I would emphasize that is pay-as-you-go funding. So in other words, it's capital from operating, and there's no new utility borrowing proposed over the next 2 years, which you'll see in a subsequent slide. As the Finance Committee is aware, and as discussed there, that was intentional to ensure that we continue to pay down the debt that has been accumulated as a result of the 2 very significant initiatives that were undertaken recently, Harbor Cleanup and the Safe Clean Drinking Water Project. I would point out that while some of our capital projects already have committed matching dollars from other levels of government, as has been announced over the past number of months with disaster mitigation funding and then also some gas tax funding, there are projects under the bilateral funding program, which is a new initiative that we do not have committed funding for. So they're highlighted in the budget that's before you this evening, and we're looking for funding from the province for those projects in order to move them forward. And those streets are really streets that are in the Central Peninsula area that have been covered by Commissioner Fudge. And with that, the last utility borrowing was for the Safe Clean Drinking Water Project. That was in 2017, where the debt of the utility peaked at nearly $107.5 million. And Finance Committee and Council have made good progress, actually great progress, since then paying down the utility debt. And at this time, the utility debt is approximately $94.7 million. And the capital budget before you this evening continues us on that path of paying down the debt at a rate of approximately $6.4 million a year. I'll now review some of the budget highlights. As I touched on, the utility has a large infrastructure deficit, and so I think it's a natural question to ask, how is that? Where we've just, recently completed harbor cleanup at $100 million, and we're nearing the completion of the Safe Clean Drinking Water Project, another very large investment. But as Council knows, the answer is that we've built a lot of new infrastructure that was needed to raise the standard and the service level that is delivered to the community. In other words, we now treat all our residential wastewater, something that we didn't do not that long ago. Our drinking water now meets national and provincial drinking water standards, something that it didn't do just a couple of years ago. And the new service levels that were attained are thanks to those significant investments that were made. However, we do have a lot of other assets that are nearing the completion, end of life, and therefore we need to make investments. Take, for example, the street renewal projects that Commissioner Fudge touched on. A lot of those projects have infrastructure that dates back to between the mid-1800s and the early 1900s. So when we selected streets for renewal, it's really based upon sewer that's in a state of collapsing, and it is in terms of repair urgent that we move forward with it. Once we identify that, we then work with other departments that I mentioned earlier on to identify the return on investment and where those dollars would be best invested to get a return on investment for growth-related initiatives. And all streets that are being renewed are in the PDA area. And street reconstruction includes storm, sanitary, and water main renewal. The 1 mile lift station is an important facility in our wastewater operation as it pumps wastewater for a large portion of the east side of the city to the new Eastern Wastewater Treatment Facility. Other budget highlights include Hayes Avenue. It's currently serviced by an old water main that runs through a forested area. and it's at the end of its life, and so this proposes a new water main that would service Hayes Avenue off Galt Road. Other infrastructure renewal includes the 3 projects that you see listed here that provide us with the ability to tighten up our wastewater system to allow for more growth and development, as was discussed earlier this evening with one of the projects that move forward. These projects allow us to tighten up the system to allow for those development initiatives to happen without building new infrastructure. Fleet renewal is funded from the reserve. And then in terms of new infrastructure, we do have a new wastewater pumping station on Prospect Street West. And continuing with budget highlights, the first 3 projects that you see listed here are related to climate change adaptation, and were the projects announced recently in terms of receiving funding under the Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Fund. For water main cleaning and lining, this is our 17th and 18th phases of the program that has delivered great results for us, with some sewer lining also proposed. And this sewer lining is an initiative that comes from a program we started just 2 years ago, where we now video 65 kilometers a year of sanitary sewer. So every 10 years, we'll be on a cycle of videoing the entire sewer inventory, and through that making repairs proactively to avoid larger costs down the road. So in conclusion, while we do have a large infrastructure deficit, as you can see, 98% of the proposed 2-year utility budget is being invested in asset renewal, with over 12% of that focused on growth. And as you can see, the infrastructure we're replacing does have a condition rating through the asset management project of F, so it is end of life. So in summary, we're attacking the infrastructure deficit while being mindful of climate change, preparing and supporting ourselves for future growth, while at the same time working to leverage every ratepayer dollar with matching dollars from other levels of government, and strategically focusing on paying down the utilities debt. With that, Your Worship, turn it back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Questions, comments? I don't see any. Does somebody want to move, receive, and file? Moved by Councillor Reardon, seconded by Councillor Norton. Okay, thank you. No lights. Okay, on the question, I'll call. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Motion is carried. Thank you, sir. Common Clerk, next item.
Your Worship, next item would be the items that were removed from consent, and the first one's 14.1, which appeared on your consent agenda as 5.15, letter from E. Cusack about parking uptown.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Norton, did you want to speak to that, to revisit that item? Sorry.
I'll go back to my initial comments.
There you go.
I believe that the Common Clerk's office has, along with the city manager, recommended that it goes to that it does go to the Parking Commission, and I have no problem with that. I'm just wondering if we can do a duplicate presentation in the spirit of supporting a young student leader who I guess who would be eager to present to this body, share her idea. We can certainly hold her to the presentation limits, and I think at the end of the day, not only for personal development for herself, but council will also learn much about the program that she's involved in and some of the ideas that she has, along with some of the parking restrictions that, from an awareness point of view, won't hurt us otherwise. So I guess I'm asking for some leniency here. Certainly understand if council wants to be very strict on it, but at the same time, if it would fit with the council agenda where we could get somebody in to present, such as this young student.
So you move a presentation to be scheduled through the clerk. Okay.
Absolutely. And I think at the same time, Your Worship, I think it's important if the Parking Commission is to hear it, that at the end we would just refer her in that direction, but come first here.
Sure, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Merrithew. Thank you. And Councillor Hickey, did you have a comment?
I did. Yeah, I'll be definitely supporting this. You'll just have to note the irony in that I suppose Councillor Norton's dedication to process is limited on very certain objects, I suppose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reardon.
Thank you, Worship. I don't have a problem with that. I guess when I read this, like I have a person's name, that's it, who just wants longer free parking. So I don't really know, like, I guess these requests to present to council, maybe they need to be fleshed out a bit more for us, because there's not much really information there. And I've got, being on the parking commission, we get all kinds of requests for this. For every little old lady that works at a church, and there's only 2.5 square kilometers of land on the peninsula, and there's a lot of churches, they want free parking. And then for the volunteers at the school, they want free parking. And so, like, these are all the things. So, you know, students, they want free parking. Everybody wants free parking, but I'm happy to listen to it, but if it's as a group, but I had no idea what the group was. I just know it's one person that's applied for some extra time to park.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick comment, and then we'll go back to you, Councillor Norton. I think for me, I think what I'm picking up on is, in fact, I made the same comment to the city manager earlier today. You have what I believe is a young leader who's taken the initiative to write, to try and problem solve, and at the end of the day, may have to go right back to parking. But you know, that's what I picked up on as well, as we have a young high school student who's trying to take some initiative and would like to present to council, and that's the spirit of what I. Okay, and back to you to wrap us up.
Yeah, no,
Councillor.
absolutely. You capture my sentiment well. The process would be for many of these speakers that come in, that they would present to us and we would refer them to the appropriate agency. So I'm dialed in on process just fine. With that being said, I think what we can do is we can help encourage this young student. Go ahead, help foster ideas, any suggestions that they hear from council, I think would be beneficial as well. At the end of the day, she's going to end up at the place that staff feels that she should be most, which is the Transit Commission. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the motion then is just to refer to the common clerk for scheduling. So I'll call the question. All those in favor? Anyone contrary-minded? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you. And then can we just go back and deal with the original recommendation was just to send it off.
The original was to...
So just receive and...
There's no need to deal
Okay,
with that.
perfect.
We
Okay.
made a decision.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next item?
Next item, Your Worship, is another item removed from consent. It appeared on consent as 516, and it's the St. John Water 2018 Annual Report.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And Commissioner, are you going to introduce? Okay, thank you. Just hit your button for me and we'll... There you go. Commissioner McGovern.
Good evening, Your Worship. Yes, so this evening, Deputy Commissioner Kendall Mason is with us, and he'll be providing a brief overview as has been requested.
Okay, thank you. And podium mic. There you go, sir. Welcome.
Good evening, Your Worship, and members of council. Tonight we'll cover just a few highlights of the 2018 annual report. As some background, the St. John Water operates the water distribution treatment system under approval to operate, and this approval to operate is granted by Department of Environment in consultation with Department of Health. As part of this approval, one of the requirements is a submission of an annual report, and that's the first step is being taken tonight. The annual report is quite thick. Tomorrow morning it'll be available for the public online with all the appendices. Again, I'll just cover a very brief few highlights. In terms of water demand reduction, the Loch Lomond potable water system experienced a decrease in demand of approximately 5.4 billion liters of potable water, and this can be attributed to the water project, the installation of new transmission mains, and the rehabilitation of other transmission mains. This greatly reduced our leakage on that system. Also, as a result of the new higher quality water from the treatment plant, there is less requirement, or actually zero requirement, for water quality flushings throughout the system. Those have been turned off, and now we've saved a lot of water under those two initiatives. The chemical consumption, chlorine demand was seen it was a large decrease in chemical demand on the east and west side. The chlorine requirement is down, the usage is down on both sides, and this is because of the higher quality water being produced at the treatment plant and being supplied from the groundwater system. The water requires less chlorine, and this is because of the organics that are removed from the water. Some of the other highlights, water distribution staff responded to 44 water main breaks in 2018, and it wasn't that many years ago that staff were responding to roughly 80 a year. So it's a considerable drop over the years. There were no transmission failures in 2018. And I guess these two items is indicative of the large investments being made by Common Council into the St. John water infrastructure. In 2018, the Loch Lomond drinking water treatment facility came online, supplying customers in August of 2018. And again, one of the last notes is in 2018, St. John Water was delivering potable drinking water that meets and exceeds Canadian drinking water standards, and that is a really high achievement for us. I guess if there's any questions or items that they'd like further discussion, we can dive into that.
I understood there was going to be a test tonight, is that? No? Okay. So this is an annual, just my question, I guess, an annual requirement. This is just meeting that annual requirement for the report.
Every year we have
Yeah.
to submit an annual report, and
Right.
it has a lot of details that environment and health look through. And
Okay.
I'll make a motion to receive and file.
Moved by the deputy, seconded by Councillor Mackenzie. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any lights on the question. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. The motion's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, next item, come clerk.
Your Worship, item 15.1 is a letter from Honorable Jeff Carr with respect to sustaining St. John, a three-part plan, and underneath that is the staff response, item 15.1.1.
Okay, city manager.
Your Worship, members of council, this is simply for information. You are all aware that the minister provided a letter to all members of council approximately 2 weeks ago, and within it, he offered up many comments and arguments in support of sustaining St. John, a three-part plan. Since this council voted to table for a period of 30 days on the question of support of that plan, it would be inappropriate for me or the staff to provide any comment on any specifics within that letter in terms of the arguments for support. That said, however, the minister did provide specific financial numbers within that letter that we felt required clarification. That is the purpose of the attached report to the letter that is within your packages. It is fair to characterize that the province takes a very optimistic view as to the potential net gain to the city from the support or from the implementation of sustaining St. John, a three-part plan. And I think it's all equally fair to characterize that your staff has taken a slightly more pragmatic approach in terms of those same calculations. In either version, and as indicated within the report, there is a net benefit to the city. It's a question of interpretation as to the degree of optimism for the realization of those benefits that results in the rather significant difference in opinion as to what the net gain is between the minister stating between $6 and $7 million and the city figures being less than that as described within the plan, to the tune of, depending on how you count it, between $1 and $3 million. That is the introduction to the letter within your packages.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Well, thank you. I just had a couple things I wanted to have clarified. On this, well, first to the city manager, I think, when you say regional facilities sharing of operating costs, well, we do that now. So where was this additional $200,000 coming from?
The sharing of operating costs does apply to the municipalities at this point in time. It does not apply to the LSDs. So the change in legislation would oblige the LSDs to contribute to operating costs. And that would, our calculation, result in our contributions going from 67% of total operating costs to approximately 59% of total operating costs.
And how
Because of
many
the LSDs.
LSDs are involved? Or do you know? I mean, I just find that figure pretty high, 200,000, you think? Well, anyway, that's okay. The other thing, I just want to make a comment because, I mean, this information went out to everybody. And there's all kinds of people making lots of comments. So, you know, I did my homework too, and I called St. John Energy to some of the people that should know what they're doing. And, you know, when the minister said $1 million and staff, you're saying 500. Well, first of all, we have to change the legislation. But according to the people at St. John Energy that should really know what they're talking about, it'll be a long, long time before we ever get $1 million because, first of all, they have to start up these new companies that they're hoping to start up, and that's once there's a change in legislation. And then it would only be, we would only get a percentage of their earnings. So, you know, I just don't see that. You know, and it'd be a long time, I think, before you get $1 million. $500,000 maybe in 2, 3, 4 years. I guess we're speculating a lot on what we're going to get, and I just don't think that, I think it's just unfortunate that people think that the money's out there, and I don't think the money's out there for us to get. And the other thing, and we dealt with this at the Growth Committee, the province contributed 40%, the feds gave 40% through a COA, and we gave 20% for the $600,000 that we got for population growth. And a lot of that we've already invested in already because we've got staff that we hired on the immigration program, more than one staff, I think, and the money is coming out of that, you know, to pay those staff members. I just think that, you know, it just seems to me it's overrated on what we're going to get here. All these numbers are not exactly what we're going to get. Just my comments, because everybody in the community has an opinion because it's all out there and nobody knows for sure what anybody's going to contribute to the city of St. John, and it's not something that's going to happen in the year 2021. Most likely, I would say to be a few years beyond that. Just my comments.
City Manager?
So just to offer some clarification, first of all, the $1 million suggested by Minister Carr from St. John Energy is actually two $500,000 commitments over a period of 2 years, totaling $1 million. Those are actually not growth revenues to the city. Those are, if you will, success payments, dividends to the city. If the permissive legislation is put in place, then St. John Energy is willing to commit a $500K times 2 years success dividend to the city in aspiration of its future growth. So it actually is not directly tied to growth. It's tied to the enabling of the legislation. As for the numbers on succeed and stay, there are, as indicated in the report, 3 key assumptions to attain the figure of 600,000. The first is that the pilot project of attracting 500 new immigrants and or their families will be achieved. That's the first assumption. The second assumption is that those immigrants will in fact stay in St. John, which is another assumption. And then the third assumption is that those 500 new families will in fact contribute approximately $34 million in new tax base growth, in new tax base to the city of St. John. They are 3 assumptions that the province is making in its declaration of $600,000 for the Succeed and Stay program.
Well, and because, even the board, and we appoint the board of St. John Energy, and they haven't even discussed this. I mean, I just feel we're way ahead of this and we're taking it for granted. But anyway, I'm not going to get into that anymore because we'll know in time, I guess, in the future. But it just seems to me that, and then for the minister to put in the operating budget initiatives, which are us, we have to downsize or find $3 million. I don't even get why this letter was even written, because That's our business to do the $3 million. It's not the minister giving us $3 million.
I'm going to just going to stop you there, Deputy, and come back if you want to go a second round, and then, thank you. Councillor Merrithew.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, City Manager. I'm glad you've explained this as written here. We do need to be open and transparent about it. I mean, I want to thank the province as far as they've come so far, but I think we all recognize that it won't cover. We just talked about this early in the session. It won't cover $10 million or $12 million in 21-22. And that's why I didn't want to pass it and was tabled, I think, most of council. But it is important, okay, to put them down, to show people what we think is really there, without speculating, okay, whether we're going to do have growth, whether we're speculating that St. John Energy will get new legislation. It's important that the public have a look at this. Even in the paper Saturday, there was a minister talking about $6.1 million to the city, and it's we've got to be clear, because I think there's more conversation to be had. You know, I see our conversation with the province of New Brunswick no different than the province of New Brunswick's conversation with the federal government. Okay, we want to make our case, we want to tell our story, and you're helping by doing that. Thank you kindly, sir.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Your Worship. I like the way this is outlined. I mean, because when we talk about tax exemption for the transit facility, if St. John were to say no to this report, does that mean that the transit system in Moncton gets a tax exemption, but the one in St. John doesn't? Or is that legislation, does that include the whole province when they change that legislation?
My understanding is if the province enacts the legislation, it would apply to all transit facilities within the province.
Okay, so we wouldn't worry about losing the 300K if they were going to put the legislation in.
Unless
even if
we lose the
didn't.
impetus for the legislation.
Right, but okay. So the capital and operating for regional facilities, that's provincial, right? That's $600,000 for us, but every area is getting the same treatment.
I'm not sure that is their intent when it comes to regional facilities. I don't know one way or the other. I can't recall in the report, I'd have to reference the report, whether they say it applies to all
regional facilities in the province. I'll check that while we go through the rest of these questions. The accommodation levy, that's for everybody, correct?
The accommodation levy has been passed in legislation and applies to all municipalities who choose to enact a bylaw. You must enact a bylaw before you can take advantage of the legislation.
Okay, so then accelerated population growth is specific to St. John?
Yes, it is their support of our pilot project, and I've already mentioned the three assumptions that are within that.
They're assuming that we'll get 600,000. And then revenue from St. John Energy specific to St. John, or is that all utilities in the province?
My understanding is it's specific to St. John, enabling the growth agenda of the city of the St. John Energy.
Okay, and if they pass legislation, they're assuming that we'll get $1 million.
If they pass
over 2 years.
legislation, St. John Energy has committed to giving us a success dividend of $500,000 in 2019 and $500,000 in 2020.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts here, but, you know, I think that in the last couple of days, we may have made some headway. I think that, you know, we need to support that. I just want to clarify one thing. At our last meeting, when we got into this discussion about the fair taxation, I made a comment which was pointed out to me, it was incorrect, because what I said was there wasn't going to be, it didn't get passed, I guess, to the Law Amendments Committee on hearings for fair taxation, when in fact it did get passed. I guess what I meant to say was, from my perspective, I didn't think that the government supported it at the time when I was watching it. So I give the credit to the opposition parties for doing that. I guess I misspoke myself, so I just wanted to clarify that. But having said all of that, overall, I think that, you know, by tabling this, it was a good move. It gives us a chance to reflect on it and do a little more conversations, although I don't know who's had conversations around this table. I personally haven't, but if they are, I hope they continue. Anyway, thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moved and second. Just a couple of comments. Thanks, and we'll wrap up. I guess for me, I just repeat myself from earlier is I think we have a responsibility to present factual information to the public. I think there's without a question that the perception was that there was $6 to $7 million coming to the city of St. John, and I quote, the city revenues for the city of nearly $7 million as of 2020. And our staff report says tonight that that is not the case. That is, in my opinion, absolutely what was presented to the public. And that number has been repeated. So what I asked, and I'm glad the city manager has clarified here tonight, is what is hard numbers in the bank, and we're hearing around 1.3, and then we're hearing, potential some upside to that with legislation being changed and so it's really important. It's not about not sharing with the public. It's really important to share as factual information as we can. So on the question, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone contrary minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. Next item, Comm Clerk. June Mike, yep.
Item 15.2 on your agenda is a sponsorship request with respect to St. Joseph Hospital Foundation first annual late night with the foundation.
I make a motion that that be referred to the city manager, the common clerk's office for the possibility of purchase of tickets. Because there are tickets, we can't be a sponsor, but there are tickets.
Okay, so as per our normal process, okay, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Marathew. On the question, all those in favor? Anybody contrary minded? Thank you. Next item.
15.3 is a sponsorship request with respect to We Believe St. John.
I'd move that go into community grants. We don't know for sure whether there will be one, but it's for 2020, so that's the best we can do right now.
I could clarify. Thank you. Seconded. Just to clarify for council very quickly, I met with the Dan Foote. I did attend the event. Pretty amazing event. They're asking for a pretty sizable contribution by the city, $10,000. I just said, look, write a letter. We'll refer it to our community grants. If they exist down the road, then that's the place for it to be considered. So, okay, just the background. On the question then, all those in favor? Anybody contrary minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. Next item.
15.4, Your Worship's a ticket purchase request for Rockmora Nursing Home Foundation.
I'd move that be referred to common clerk's office for tickets if council wishes to go.
Okay, we have 4 minutes. Okay, thank you. Moved, seconded by Councillor Sullivan. All those in favor? Anybody contrary minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. Next item.
15.5, sponsorship request for New Brunswick Community College Orientation Week activities.
I move that be referred to the growth committee, and the reason for that is because there is a possibility if they want to spend $1,000 for barbecue, new students.
Okay, moved and seconded by Councillor Sullivan. Thank you. On the question, all those in favor? Anybody contrary minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. And I didn't anticipate that one, but it's okay. Next item.
15.6, Your Worship's a letter from St. John Citizen Coalition with respect to Grow SJ brand.
I'll refer that to the staff and mayor's office for response at our next meeting.
Okay.
Or it could be referred to the city manager.
Well, I guess city manager, but some of the questions were specific to the mayor's office, just to give him an opportunity to respond.
Okay, shoot, I was going to say something, but now I can't. So, okay.
Yeah.
I'll do that. City manager's fine.
City manager's fine?
Okay, thank you. Referred, thank you. Moved by Councillor Sullivan, seconded by
Yes, I'll second it. Thank you.
Councillor Marathew. Okay, thank you. On the question, all those in favor? Anybody contrary minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. Motion is carried.
And the final item.
One more.
Final item, Your Worship, came from Committee of the Whole. It's 17.1. It's with respect to Sculpture St. John. I have the motion here if you'd like it read.
Please. Yep.
Direct the city manager to inform Sculpture SJ that the City of St. John will become a destination sponsor for Sculpture St. John in 2020, subject to available budget, that the city will not become a community partner in 2020, and that the city is committed to working to identify a suitable location for the 2020 event in St. John, but unfortunately, Fundy Key will not be a feasible option.
I'll move that recommendation.
Okay, moved by Councillor Norton, seconded by the deputy. You okay with that? And
Yep.
city manager, comment, and then.
A very quick comment, Your Worship. Tied to that motion was discussion, and we have undertaken to try to work with some of our partner agencies to perhaps find another way to act as community sponsor, and therefore we will undertake that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reardon?
I was just going to ask the city manager to add that little piece on.
There you go. He's reading your mind. Okay, thank you.
Oh, I don't want to do that.
On the question, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody contrary-minded? Okay, thank you. And with 2 minutes to spare, move adjourn. Thank you.
Oh, gosh.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Oh, shoot, I wanted to